Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Mr. Speaker. This is the Scott motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the Senate refuses to concur in the House amendments to the following Senate File 1143, an act relating to state government. The Senate respectfully requests that a conference committee be appointed thereon. Senate conferees are Limmer, Newman, and Hall. Scott moves that the House accede to the request of the Senate and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with the like committee appointed by the Senate.
Call the member from Anoka, Representative Scott, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, members, there's some differences in the data practices bill that we need to work out, so I would like to have a conference committee.
Discussion of the Scott motion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails.
Message from the Senate, Mr. Speaker. I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate file herewith transmitted. Senate File 2043, signed Kel R. Ludeman, Secretary of the Senate.
First reading of Senate files.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2403, an act relating to data practices. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Civil Law.
First reading. Fiscal calendar. The first bill on the fiscal calendar today is Senate File 1597. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1597 on the fiscal calendar for today, unofficially engrossed and reprinted for the House to include committee amendments, an act relating to military affairs.
I call the member from Washington, Representative Dettmer, to explain your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Senate File 1597, the bill strengthens the current set-aside program for the state construction contract awarded by MnDOT to veterans-owned small businesses. It has also authorized counties to have their own bid preferences programs for the veterans' businesses. Under the current law, the bid preference program, as it applies to MnDOT, applies similar to veterans-owned small businesses as small targeted group businesses. The bill creates a new subdivision applied solely for the veteran-owned small businesses. The Commissioner may award up to, it's not a mandate, it's up to 6% preferences in the amounts for the bid for the specific construction work on the veterans-owned small businesses. In the Article 1 of the bill, the small business contracts makes various changes to MnDOT bid preferences program for veterans-owned small businesses. And the definitions, there's no changes made. We also have subdivision 2, small targeted work, the targeted group businesses, small business contracts preferences. It clarifies has clarifying language. And also subdivision 2A, small targeted groups, businesses, subcontracting goals are set. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for a green vote.
There is an amendment at the desk. There's an author's amendment at the desk. The Chief Clerk will report the author's amendment.
Dettmer and others moving to amend Senate File 1597, the unofficial engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A4.
Mr. Speaker, just a couple technical amendments. I don't think the people have the amendment yet, but it's just a technical amendment.
Members, the amendment is being distributed right now. Representative Dettmer, if you'd like to explain the amendment. However, we will not vote until each member has received a copy. The member from Washington, Representative Dettmer, to your author's amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's just a technical amendment that staff has brought to my attention, and we needed to make that small change in wording. Thank you.
I've got the amendment.
You do?
Yeah, I had it up there.
Why did Kate pull it off and give it to me? Okay. Kate pulled it off and gave it to me. Yeah.
You need one?
Yep. Never mind.
Tim, you need one?
No question.
Already.
The member from okay. Members, we are just waiting for each member to receive a copy of the amendment before we take the vote. The member from Hennepin, Representative Champion, to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Also, thank you to the members. I want to encourage folks to support the amendment that is coming around to them and support the bill also because this is a great compromise and is something that is beneficial for us all. Thank you.
Further discussion to the author's amendment. Seeing as each member has received a copy of the amendment, is there any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the author's amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The amendment is adopted. Seeing no further amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1597, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote.
Thank you.
Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 125 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended. Its title is agreed to. Conference Committee report on a House file.
Conference Committee report. This is the O'Driscoll motion. Conference Committee report on House File 2244, an act relating to the Permanent School Fund. The report is addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File 2244, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all 5 conferees on the part of the House and all 5 conferees on the part of the Senate. O'Driscoll moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File 2244 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
Thank you, members. If you could please take your conversations to the alcoves, or better yet, the retiring room. The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll, to explain the Conference Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is House File 2244, and as it left here, we went to conference committee, worked out our differences with the Senate, and we're bringing back for your consideration today a bill that contains most of the provisions that were important to us on the House side of the equation. And at this point, I would ask that we go ahead and vote yes on the conference report.
Discussion to the conference committee report. Discussion. All those in favor of adoption of the conference committee report signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2244 is amended by conference.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Guinness.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative O'Driscoll, yield.
He will yield. Representative Guinness, 1 minute, please. Members, if you could, please. Please take your conversations to the alcove, or better yet, the retiring room. Representative Guinness has asked Representative O'Driscoll to yield. Representative Guinness, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative O'Driscoll, I think everyone on the floor agrees that we want to do the best we can for our school children. But when I look at what you are bringing to us, I see issues that are not integral to your bill. And so my first one I would ask is, help us understand why you want to change a law that's been in effect since 1923, and that's the law that says that lands on lakes or waters that the state owns shall not be sold without legislative approval.
The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Guinness, this is a provision that was something that the Senate wanted, and we had debate and discussion on it, and we conceded that to the Senate.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Guinness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative O'Driscoll, just because the Senate wanted something did not make it good policy. We've had a law in effect since 1923 that says that you cannot sell lakeshore lands without legislative approval. It is not necessary for the purposes of your bill to change the law to say that the legislature no longer has to approve the sale of lakeshore lands. So it looks to me like there are other interests that are piggybacking on your bill. The second piggyback that I see is the Section 4, which requires the DNR commissioner to recommend compensation to the trust fund from state non-general funds. And from my understanding of the conference discussion, that meant or included the new legacy funds and the environmental trust funds. Help us understand why, when folks just voted for the legacy funds and certainly had no idea that we would be using legacy funds to purchase lands that were already in state control, that you are asking and requiring the commissioner to recommend that those monies now be used instead of for their intended purposes for this purpose. Thank you. I would ask Representative O'Driscoll to yield.
Representative O'Driscoll yields. Representative Guinness. Representative Driscoll yields. Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Wagenius, as you well know, and the term that you used was these properties are within state control. And again, just to review for members, there's 5 million acres of property similar to that would include the trust land properties that are within the control of the state of Minnesota. The difference between some of those lands that the DNR manages for conservation purposes and the student trust land properties is that we have to treat the student trust land properties separately and differently. And in some of the areas, there's commingling of these properties. And one of the directives in the conference report is that the commissioner, along with others, put together a 10 and 25-year plan to be able to unmingle these properties, and perhaps funds may need to be used to purchase these properties to preserve them for conservation and or wildlife management areas. And so they are in state control, but again, because of the fiduciary obligation, we wanted to make sure that we could keep those properties as we prioritize them for the long-range use of the kids here in the state of Minnesota. And again, the fact that they're under state control doesn't mean that the state can just set them aside. Because of that fiduciary obligation required under the Constitution of the executive branch and of the legislature, we wanted to make sure that we were looking at funds and sources on that. And we did specify legacy and bonding and others. And we thought, you know what, let's go more globally and not just limit it to state opportunities, but perhaps some federal or private grant funds. And maybe if we could even work with the folks from the Nature Conservancy Fund and group, that they may want to step forward to help preserve some of those lands and pay a fair market value for those from the kids here in the state of Minnesota, since it is their land and we have that fiduciary obligation.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Driscoll. Our voters in Minnesota just passed the legacy bill within the last 5 years, even shorter than that. Do you think that any one of them who voted for that thought that the money that they were asking legislators to spend would be used to purchase lands that were already in control of the state? Now, I can see that suggesting bonding dollars is one thing, but this seems to me to be telling the voters that you're doing a power grab, frankly. That's what it feels. Oh, no, I take that back. It's a money grab. And it feels very unfortunate to me that you have added these two provisions into something that might otherwise have been a very good bill. But these two provisions take something and a concept that is otherwise very good and used it for other purposes. A money grab on one hand, and on the other hand, repealing a law that's been in effect since 1923 for no other reason than there have been some special interests out there that have wanted that law repealed. Members, while the underlying bill here may be fine, these two provisions take it out of the fine and move it into an absolute red vote.
The member from Stearns, Representative Driscoll.
Madam Speaker, would Representative Wagenius yield to a question?
She yields. Representative Driscoll.
Thank you. Representative Wagenius, you used the word money grab and power grab. My question to you is, how would you define the state of Minnesota's control of the commingled trust lands, and how would you suggest that the DNR and the legislature move forward in alleviating all of those problems that we have out there with the commingling of land? And to answer your question, I'm not going to speculate what the voters thought about that, but I will suspect that the voters expect that we will keep our constitutional obligations and those having to do with the trust lands. as vested by our Constitution with the legislature and the executive branch.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm not sure, Representative O'Driscoll, that I had heard a question there, but we have two different provisions in the Constitution that we are looking at. One, brand new. One is the legacy, brand new, just been voted on by our voters. And what our voters said is that they wanted to protect lands they wanted to protect prairies, wetlands, and forests and other habitat for fish, game, and wildlife. It didn't say in there that this money is made to give to the school trust fund. Those words aren't in the Constitution, and I think that citizens would be surprised that you are saying that those are the monies that should be taken to put in the school trust fund. That is one of the two reasons. There are others, but one of the two main reasons that I think folks should vote no on this bill.
Members, are any further discussion? Any further discussion? The member from Ramsey, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam
Dakota,
Speaker.
excuse me.
That's okay. Would Representative O'Driscoll yield for a question?
He yields. Representative Hansen.
I'm just giving Representative Rukavina time to warm up here. I know he's getting ready. So, Representative O'Driscoll, I'm looking on page 9 of the report, and I'm trying to sort out the differences here between commission and a director and the Commissioner of Natural Resources. And then I see that during these difficult economic times, we're hiring a director and adding up to 5 employees in the unclassified service that may be funded through a variety of sources. So could you explain really the chain of command here of how that director, because I think this is somewhat new compared to what was on the floor before, with how does the director relate to the commissioner and the commission, and then the 5 additional employees, so a 6-member new agency, and where do they get paid from?
The members from Stearns, Representative Driscoll.
Representative Hansen, I was actually hoping you would ask me that question today, so I'm very pleased that it worked out this way. First and foremost, the chain of command is that these lands will still rest in the day-to-day control of the DNR, which is something I know that was important to members. Number 2, the commissioner of the DNR had actually had an operational order to hire an executive in this type of a position. So we've got funding for that. Secondly, or should say thirdly, in the bill that we passed off the House floor, it said that there could be staff that would be hired by appropriation from the legislature, and there was no cap on the number of people. When this report came back from the conference committee, it puts a cap of 5 employees still through appropriation. So the legislature has the ability to make that type of a decision. Where those funds come from? Probably from the same sources that we come from the funds right now, which are the monies that are raised from the land trust that support the 130 employees that the DNR has in place right now to take care of the day-to-day operations, whereas putting a mechanism in place to be able to do the long range. How does this work? The executive director will be housed in the Department of Administration, and those 5 employees will have to have background in mining, real estate, forestry, to help put together and to develop and to be an oversight and an advisor to making sure that we are keeping the kids' best interests at heart. So I thank you for that question. I hope that helps for some clarification.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If Representative O'Driscoll would yield for another question.
He'll yield. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative O'Driscoll, so what's the effective date on this legislation?
The member from Stearns, Representative Driscoll.
Representative Hansen, the Legislative Commission goes in force starting next session, and then the following July we will be looking at hiring the Executive Director and putting the wheels in motion.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative O'Driscoll would yield for another question.
He'll yield. Representative Hansen.
Representative O'Driscoll, so the establishment here, there isn't going to be anybody hiring anyone this fiscal year or till next year. So there isn't an appropriation for this bill at this time, is that correct?
The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Madam Speaker, Representative Hansen, that is correct, and that is one of the things that we had looked at in this for two reasons. One, fire suppression charges, which could be anywhere from $2 million right now, are dealt with in this bill as well, which would free some money up. And then number two, because this is dealing with trust lands, the trust land revenues would be available just like they are for the 130-plus positions that the DNR is currently funding as well. And we also believe that some of those positions may be able to be transferred over. It's going to be the legislature's decision on how they might want to go about doing that. When I say transferred over, to reduce some duplication, that's something that this is enabling legislation. We'll work out some of those staffing details once we know that we have a law in place.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and if Representative O'Driscoll would yield for one more question.
He'll yield. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative O'Driscoll, and I'm looking at kind of the money here, and so you've talked about how the chain of authority goes, but in terms of the money, and it seems that there's still some confusion here about managing the trust to maximize benefits and managing the land to maximize benefits. I see that throughout the bill there is some direction to the Commission to provide recommendations on managing the trust versus managing the land. It talks about managing the land as well. And I thought the State Board of Investment was involved in managing the trust money versus the land. Could you explain this difference between managing the land, where you get revenue from the land, and managing the trust to maximize the benefits of the trust?
The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Madam Speaker, Representative Hansen, the Legislative Commission nor the Executive Director are going to have the day-to-day money operations. You're right, that stays with the State Board of Investment. What we're talking about for the long-range plan is, for example, doing those swaps of properties, purchasing those properties, putting together a plan to be able to affect some sales and some cleaning up of those orphaned or intermingled properties, to also be able to look at areas that we might feel would be in the long-range plan for timber and get something on paper so that as we transcend our roles here in the legislature, that there's a governing document that the legislature can work on. And the Legislative Commission would be the clearinghouse, as was the original intention, for those kinds of things that dealt with the trust land, to help us fulfill our fiduciary obligations under the Constitution as well.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And if Representative O'Driscoll would yield.
He'll yield. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative O'Driscoll, so is the director and the employees and the director, these additional 6 employees, are they employees of the legislative branch or of the executive branch?
The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hansen, they would be employees of the legislative branch, employees of the executive branch, because they would be housed under the Department of Administration. And so the governor would still appoint the executive director, and the executive director would hire those individuals to help provide the guidance, the technical expertise as needed.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So if they are members of the executive branch, I believe they would be covered by legislative auditor authority, whereas if they were members of the legislative branch, they would have to be responsible to the Commission. I think that's the way I understand it. Would Representative O'Driscoll yield if that's correct or not?
He'll yield. Representative O'Driscoll.
Madam Speaker, Representative Hansen, yes.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. It's kind of interesting with this conference committee report. There was a letter that came from the DNR commissioner and the governor to all of us 2 days ago, I think, and then last night the conference committee made some changes, and the conference report is in front of us over a bill that establishes something that won't take effect for about a year. During that time, the legislative auditor will be looking at the issue of the trust fund. I believe we authorized an exchange in the last week with the lands bill, Representative Hancock's lands bill. I'm not sure how that occurs involved in this. Representative Wagenius raised the question about where do the dollars come from, that using outdoor heritage dollars or using clean water dollars or using lottery dollars for school trusts, I think raises a huge question, along with several other questions. I didn't vote for the bill on the way out. I think there's still some concerns with it, and I think over the next year we can come to some answers on that and look at where do we go before implementation occurs on this bill.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Murphy.
Well,
The member from St. Louis, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Driscoll, I spoke to somebody in the hall, and they said that this conference committee talked about fishing fees and hunting fees, license fees. Did that take place? That there was discussions about the fees on fishing and hunting licenses? I said, it couldn't be, because that doesn't have anything to do with school trust funds exactly. So was there discussions about fishing and hunting fees in your discussions about school trust lands and this new commission?
Are you asking him to yield, Representative Murphy?
Madam Speaker, I am.
Representative Driscoll yields. Representative Driscoll.
Madam Speaker, Representative Murphy, there was a lot of things that were discussed, but that was never anything that we were looking at including as a part of this bill. One of the more global questions we have to ask ourselves as a fiduciary is, we have 5 million acres of property, 5 million acres worth of property in the state of Minnesota, and we charge the trust lands for the maintenance of those, and when we charge gaming and fishing fees and those types of things, but the kids don't get any money back for the use of that land, we have to ask ourselves, should the kids be required, obligated to let their lands be available at no cost but yet be charged for the maintenance of those lands? I think that was one of the things that we had talked about, with the idea of how important this piece of legislation is to be able to track and have those kinds of conversations and to maintain our fiduciary obligations. Because I would represent to this entire body, there isn't a group of third graders who's sitting around right now at lunchtime and saying, hey, before we go out to recess, let's take a look at our financials on our trust lands. They don't even know that they have it. They count on us to be able to do that on their behalf.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Murphy. The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I want to just publicly thank Representative O'Driscoll and Representative Dietrich for getting this bill as far as they have, but I guess I really want to thank Representative McNamara, because for 26 years I've been trying to point out to this body what's been going on with school trust lands, and I never could get it by the chair of the Natural Resource Committee. And the reason why is because nobody ever wanted to look at the real facts. Representative Murphy, I don't know if you were trying to imply that there was a conspiracy going on this bill for cutting some kind of a deal, but I can tell you there has been a conspiracy since I've been here for 26 years with the Department of Natural Resources managing this land and taking money that they don't deserve to take. And Representative Wagenius, I don't think anybody in this state would have voted for the legacy amendment, as you call it, if they had known that a group of hunters and fishing folks were going to actually control it and think it was their money to buy land, and that everyone on this floor then would be kind of afraid to exercise our constitutional right to overrule them. That amendment was about clean water and the arts, and I remember the advertising campaign because my son was involved in it on the other side of that issue. So I remember that quite well. But here's the thing, members. In 1997 or 98, and I can't remember because I'm getting old and I'm losing it, okay? But I sat on this floor to exchange the last 262, I believe it was, lakeshore lots that were on school trust land. The environmental community demanded that we exchange land for land, lakeshore footage for lakeshore footage. And I stood up on this floor because I was the author that put that exchange in both the Natural Resource Finance Bill and the tax bill that year. I put it in two places, Representative O'Driscoll, because I figured it'd get killed if it was just in one place. And it passed out in both of those bills. And a land exchange occurred. And the environmental community stood right outside that door and convinced everybody on our side that we had to have land for land, lakeshore footage for lakeshore footage. And Representative Wagenius and a few others that are still on this floor today, I asked you. I said, a decade from now, I'm going to ask all of you how much money that lakeshore property generated for the school trust for our kids. And I said 14 years ago, I guess, the answer that I knew I'm going to give today, and the answer is nothing. Zero. And a couple of years ago, when we had the opportunity to put 16 or 18 million dollars, and some of you on this floor know better than me, probably Representative Carlson, who's kind of hiding over there trying to ignore me because he was one of my adversaries on this. When you were Ways and Means Chair, I asked in Ways and Means, well, why don't we, Finance, why don't we have the DNR exchange some of that lakeshore? 22 miles, Representative Wagenius, they ended up with getting. They got 22 miles of lakeshore on Lake Vermilion. And I said, why don't we exchange some of that and put 18 million bucks in the kids' school trust fund instead of giving it to United States Steel? And everybody looked at me like I was nuts. And I said, a trustee would never do this. A trustee would be in jail if they did to a trust. A lawyer, Representative Liebling, if you were the lawyer of a trust and you gave $18 million to a mining company instead of the trustee that you were supposed to be, or the beneficiaries of a trust that you were supposed to be the trustee for, you know what would happen to you. No, you mentioned piggybacking, Representative Wagenius. Let me tell you, Representative O'Driscoll didn't tell you the real truth. The language for the lakeshore property came from the Department of Natural Resources, as I understand it. They asked for that. No nebulous intent on the part of Representative O'Driscoll or Representative Dietrich or Representative McNamara or even poor Representative Simon, who got stuck on the conference committee. You talked about money grabs. I'll tell you where the money grab's been for 26 years. It's been everybody turning a blind eye to the kids. Members, we have, and I think acreage-wise, Representative O'Driscoll or Dietrich can correct me, I think one of the largest amounts of school trust land left in the United States of America. Yet we don't have one of the biggest school trusts because we have let this abuse go on. In other states, if the Nature Conservancy doesn't like what's happening on school trust land to raise money, their agencies say to the Nature Conservancy, bid against us, Representative Wagenius. If there is old growth and Representative Dill's constituent, Mr. Kynes up in Ely, bids on the old growth, and all of a sudden the Nature Conservancy or whoever complains about the old growth being cut down in other states, their administrations say, then you bid against Mr. Kynes. And you can have the old growth trees stay there forever as long as they'll stand up, and when they fall over, at least the kids got their money. But that hasn't happened here. No, I've seen this go on for years, members, and I commend, again, the three leads on this who have taken this to the point they have. But there is no conspiracy here on the part of anybody on that conference committee doing something underhanded or cutting deals, Representative Murphy. The only conspiracy that's gone on here is for my 26 years, and I have pointed out to members on this House floor year after year the abuse, and everybody turned a blind eye. The only conspiracy is what's gone on in the management of these lands and the theft of the money at the Department of Natural Resources. And I commend you for getting as far as you've gotten. I don't know what's going to change. I don't know how this is going to work, but I commend you for at least, for once, thinking about the kids first. So good job, and I'm voting green, and I think everybody should be voting green on this bill today.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Rookavina. You gave a nice long history and summation of this issue, and I too credit Representative Dietrich and Representative Rookavina, Representative McFarland for chairing the School Trust Lands Advisory Commission, of which I'm a part, and obviously the good representative from Stearns who's carrying this thing to the finish line for us. This is a really, really good move, members. I couldn't believe it when I first got on this School Fund Advisory Commission, and no offense to the people involved, but they could not produce even a basic spreadsheet for us. Literally millions of acres, hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, funding for our schools, and really just nothing even coming close to approaching the level of fiduciary responsibility. And I know this thing's gone a long way, and Representative O'Driscoll, you've done a great job negotiating, and I had fairly strong opinions about just yanking this thing out of the DNR entirely, and now I think we've probably landed in just the right spot for this first move in the right direction. So thank you to all those folks who played such an important role, and I concur this is a really, really good green vote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Rookavina, since you addressed most of your questions to me, I think I do need to answer them. You brought up 4 different issues, and I don't think any of them were central to the issues that we're talking about here. I know that you and I share a real concern about having a citizens committee make recommendations for the heritage money, the money to buy lands, to protect lands. Not that that's a bad idea, but that we don't treat it right now as an advisory committee, but tend to go along without question. But that's not the issue that is integral to this bill. The issue that is integral to this bill is that in the bill there is a request that the Commissioner of the DNR recommend that these heritage funds that are used to buy land for hunting and fishing and habitat, use those monies then for purchasing school trust lands. And I don't think anyone who voted on that anticipated that this money that they were planning on using to acquire new lands and to protect lands, to restore them, to enhance them, no one was anticipating when they voted for it that this money then would be used to purchase lands that the state already controlled. That's issue 1. Issue 2, you brought up Lake Vermilion. Governor Pawlenty was in charge of the negotiations on Lake Vermilion. I wish I could say that I was in control of those negotiations. I was not. So let's not mix up the Lake Vermilion issue with this issue. They're two entirely different issues. The third issue, members, is there's this notion out there that we're making so much money from forestry that the school trust lands are going to reap huge benefits from forestry. Truth of the matter is we don't make much money in forestry. The second truth of the matter is we spend a ton of money supporting our forests, buying trees, etc. And I don't think that the school trust folks are, when they really see the numbers, are going to want to take over and spend all the money they need to keep their forests going. That's the third issue. And the fourth issue, Representative Rukavina, is the question of these lands not producing for the school kids. And I would agree with that. And several years ago, maybe four years ago, I suggested that we use some of the hunting and fishing money to put in the trust funds to reimburse the kids for the use of that land. And I was met with sheer horror when I suggested that. I'm glad kind of people are coming around to thinking that's a good idea now, but we couldn't even move on that issue, which is probably the most reasonable thing that we could possibly do to reimburse the school trust fund, with essentially paying rent. But underlying this bill, there is nothing in here about paying rent. It's buying the lands, and I would say again that it is a money grab. Vote no.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, members, I think you can all breathe a sigh of relief. I'm not going to go into the school trust land story and how many acres the children in this state own and the whole trust fiduciary responsibilities. My message here today is really very simple, and that is the management and the oversight of the school trust lands needs reform. And House File 2244 provides two of the major reforms that are needed in the area of school trust lands. House File 2244 is a good compromise, and it is a positive step in the right direction. Is it perfect? No. The reason it's not perfect is because I didn't get my way. But there are two major components of reform in this bill, and I want to outline just a little bit about each of those. First of all, as we all know, the school children of this state own 2.5 million acres of land, 1 million in land, and then 1 million in mineral rights. The school children of this state have an inheritance of a trust fund of over 750 million as we speak. I have said before that this level of land ownership and trust responsibilities warrants one trustee who will demonstrate undivided loyalty, working for the children of this state on their lands every day, all year, today and in the future. I have always said that we need one person whose sole responsibility is to consistently evaluate the management of the trust lands and to maximize the trust fund and advocate on behalf of the beneficiaries, or in other words, the school children of this state. There are so many needs to be identified in the area of school trust lands, and this one person can do it. Costs need to be reduced. It is difficult to make money on forestry, but when your administrative costs have gone up 300% in a period of 5 years, that does not mean they're right. They need to be reduced. Revenues need to be increased. Land parcels need to be assessed, traded, or possibly preserved and possibly sold. Creative solutions need to be explored. Recommendations need to be made. They need to be discussed and potentially implemented. Without a trust director and continuing to depend on the DNR for all of those actions is a recipe for failure. So House File 2244 allows for a land trust director to be hired. And after 5 years of working on this issue, I know that the school children of this state will benefit from having one person to work on their behalf day in and day out. The other issue that House File 2244 addresses is the issue that we will continue to introduce legislation that affects the school trust lands. And the DNR, in fact, as the trustees have traveled the state and continually told us, to their own admission, that their actions as land trust managers, they are often constrained because of conflicting legislative direction and limited funding. House File 2244 creates a legislative permanent school fund commission, and they are to hear school trust land bills, evaluate them, and make an assessment. Is this good for the school children of the state? And then they are to recommend that to the director and to the DNR and anybody else who has influence over school trust lands. So those are the two major pieces of reform in this bill that are sorely needed. I just want to say in closing, Madam Speaker, that I am so grateful to the leadership in this body, past and present, for allowing this level of discussion in the area of school trust lands to be had. It is long overdue. But regardless, I am hopeful that today the changes that we are going to make will have a positive impact on the school trust fund for the school children of this state. It has been said over and over again, but it is so true in this instance. We can't change the past, but we can change the future. We can return the inheritance of the school trust fund back to the children through a director who can give undivided loyalty to the beneficiaries of this state. With that, I encourage everybody in this body to vote green on the conference report. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, I voted for this bill on the way out, and I feel a little bit torn today about whether to vote for it again. And I wonder if Representative O'Driscoll would yield to a question.
He yields. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative O'Driscoll, I really am very supportive of what you're trying to do here and what Representative Dietrich has been trying to do. And I really have, as they say, drunk that Kool-Aid, right? But something in the bill here gives me pause, and that is the part about selling the land, excluding the school trust lands from the rule about having the legislature weigh in on sale of lands along public waterways. And I don't understand. I guess I can see why you'd maybe want to do that, but I feel uncomfortable about that. And I know you discussed that. It was discussed a little bit, but I've been trying to listen, and I'm still really not sure why that's there. And it is troubling to me. So I wonder if you could just explain to me why you felt it was necessary, or why the conference committee thought that had to be in there. Because I think this would have been a fine bill without that, and I wouldn't have had trouble voting with you again, but now I'm not so sure.
The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Liebling. The reason that is in, that was something that the Senate had asked for, and it's also something that the Commissioner from the DNR had asked for as well. The thing that's important to remember about this is not just the DNR acting alone anymore with this new power. Because of the executive director and the land oversight that we have, if there is a disagreement, Let's say that the DNR says you'd like to sell that, and the executive director says no way, no how. What's going to happen is that disagreement, an unresolved disagreement, would have to be registered with the governor and the legislative commission, and it is at that time that we would be able to take action if we had concurred that that is not something that we felt should be taking place. It would allow the day-to-day operations to continue, and with the legislative commission, we have much, much more oversight from our branch than we have ever had before in this particular matter. So there was a comfort level with the conferees that vesting this power with the DNR right now would be appropriate given the other safeguards that were put in place. And of course the DNR knows that if it gets abused, it can be taken away just as fast as it had been given to them.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Representative O'Driscoll. And, I guess the thing that, I think that's helpful. I guess I'm still a little bit concerned about, maybe I just didn't totally understand you, but at what point would we, the legislature, become aware that this land was going to be sold? Would it be after, would we be aware of it only if there was this conflict that you're talking about? I'm just wondering if we would be able to stop that, because obviously once the land is sold, DNR can say whoops, but once this precious land is sold, then you can't unsell it. So at what point do we get to at least know that this is being contemplated so that an objection could be raised?
The member from Stearns, Representative Driscoll.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Representative Liebling, and I'm glad we're having this part of the conversation on this bill as well, because it helps us to understand the mechanisms that have been put in place. Remember that the Commissioner of the DNR and the Executive Director are going to be required to provide regular and ongoing reports on the progress of implementing the long-range plans to the Legislative Commission. And the Legislative Commission will act as the eyes and the ears of this entire body, because it's made up of 6 senators, 6 House members, evenly divided. So we're looking to take the political aspect out of this. And as they're talking about, well, in the next 2 or 3 years, here's what our plan is, or in the next 5 years or 10 years, here's what our plan is. If we don't like what we see at that point, we're certainly going to be on top of that to either take special legislative action or to remove that right completely. I think that there are enough safeguards in here when we're talking about the long-range planning on this. And again, I think we have to have some faith that this tool will be used correctly. And if it's not, it's sort of like my mom and dad would tell me when I was growing up, we're going to give you this extra latitude. If you don't use it right, it's going away as fast as it came.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I was proud to be on the conference committee here, even though not too long ago I didn't know too much about this issue, and I still don't know as much as Representative Dietrich and Representative O'Driscoll. But I think the key thing, members, to remember is this went out of here with 104 votes. It's hard to get 104 votes in this chamber for anything. That is an overwhelming margin. And the reason I think that's important is it's come back from conference committee actually a milder, smoother, better, more accommodating bill. So to the extent people had questions or concerns, which are legitimate and viable, on its way out, I think you can rest assured that this is a tamer, milder bill, one that the Commissioner and the Governor are much more likely to approve of, and the Governor is more likely to sign this time. So I understand the questions. They're legitimate questions. It's an interesting issue. It's a tough issue. But I think in the end, this is a relatively mild approach to making sure that the school kids of this state have someone, a trustee, a fiduciary, looking out for their best interests. And there will be clashes. There will be differences of opinion as to whether land should be sold or what the use should be. And when those inevitable, natural, respectful differences come up, there's a mechanism in here for solving those. That's how I see the bill, as someone who until recently was not real involved in these issues, but has watched from afar with admiration, as Representative O'Driscoll and Representative Dietrich for years have talked about this issue. So I think just putting in perspective what we had before leaving the House with 104 votes and what we have now, which is a more palatable, more reasonable, milder bill, I urge your yes vote. And I want to thank Representative Dietrich and Representative O'Driscoll. Representative Dietrich, you in particular, because this is sort of your swan song on this issue, and you've worked really hard in a really dedicated way for so many years on this issue when nobody else cared about it and nobody else really knew about it. And at least speaking from this legislator's standpoint, you really have educated me about this issue. So members, regardless of how you vote on this issue, I think we should all thank Representative Dietrich and Representative O'Driscoll as well for bringing this very important issue to our attention. And Representative Dietrich, this is a great legacy for you. Thanks.
The member from Dakota, Representative McNamara.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Representative Rukavina, you thanked a number of people, but I want to make sure that we thank you. When the conference committee got jammed up and people were saying things, and I said, you know, we need a pinch hitter here. We got to get somebody that actually knows this stuff, because some of the folks were saying stuff that didn't seem like it made sense with what you were talking about. And you came down and sat at the table and helped us get it done, and I really appreciate that. And to Representative Dietrich, who will be able to hang this issue very much, that we need to put it on her shoulders for making it happen, because she didn't give up when too many people wanted to say, oh, no, that's not that big a deal, and, you know, this is Minnesota and the environment, and we're supposed to take care of it and not worry about what the Constitution says. Well, members, Representative O'Driscoll, thank you so very much, and Representative Dietrich, for carrying on when the odds were tough, and even when you got in the conference committee and it was tough going. And this is really a terrific bill, members. It leaves some challenges for us. We've got some real challenges. A lot of public land up there that currently is being enjoyed by a lot of people for free. And I would argue in many cases we're spending kids' money to allow people like me to hunt and fish it for free, or to sit at a picnic table. We actually have picnic tables on the shore of Lake Vermilion, Representative Rukavina, correct me if I'm wrong, but we got picnic tables sitting on trust land as a amenity for folks. We got numbers of boat landings. We got boat landings, and I'm not sure, but I don't think you can build or log too much in a parking lot of a boat landing or on the concrete ramp of a boat landing, and we're not paying anything for it. So we've got some work before us. To those that think this is over, it's not over. But members, this is a huge reform. This is what a lot of you came here to do, and thank you to the members on the conference committee, including the expertise of Representative Simon, who helped us out with some of the legal work. So thank you very much. And the Senate conferees in a bipartisan way helped a lot too. So thank you all for the work you did.
The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, when this bill left the House floor, I voted against it. But unlike our colleague from Rochester, I no longer am conflicted, and I strongly support this bill and hope all members of this legislature support the bill. When it left the House floor, you see, it created a Citizens Advisory Council, and it had the Legislative Council be advisory to the Citizens Advisory Council, who then made the recommendations to the legislature. And I thought that was a little backwards and a little silly, so I couldn't support that. And you people who have served on and have butted heads with the Lessards Outdoor Heritage Council can understand my heartburn on that issue. Well, I'm glad to hear that one of the first things that happened in the conference committee was that convoluted strategy was set aside. We no longer have that three-step process. Therefore, I think the remainder of the bill is actually very, very good policy. Thank you to the members of the conference committee that worked to put it together, and I would encourage 134 green votes.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative O'Driscoll yield, please?
He yields. Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Representative O'Driscoll. The marvels of modern technology come into play here, and as we're debating this, I have a message on my computer saying that it didn't appear that the repeal of our 1923 law saying that you couldn't sell lakeshore land without legislative approval was not in either bill. Can you help us out? Is that correct?
Member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Madam Speaker, Representative Wagenius, that is correct. That is one of the things that the DNR had asked for, and it was endorsed by the Senate, and we debated it, and we decided that we would include it for all the reasons that we had just talked about here this afternoon.
Representative Wagenius.
So Representative Driscoll, just so I am understanding clearly, the provision to repeal the 1923 law that says you can't sell lakeshore land without coming to the legislature was not in either bill. This provision is not necessary for your bill. It is something I know that some interest groups, some land developers have wanted for a long time. So I just observed to members of the legislative body that we normally do not include in a bill something that is not in either bill, and certainly something that is so highly controversial as not selling lakeshore lands.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina, excuse me.
Well, Representative Wagenius, I'm really glad you brought up the conveniences of modern technology, because I need not remind you that there are 25 metals in that computer. And in the computer that the environmentalist that sent you that message has copper, nickel, zinc, palladium, platinum, titanium, whatever. But I digress, members. Issue number 1, Representative Wagenius, on the language on 3.33, including recommendations for appropriations from the general fund, non-general fund, and state bond fund. And you brought it up and said I didn't address the issue. I thought I did. I gave, I believe it was Representative Dietrich at the beginning of the session, work an intern of mine had done last year that showed over the last 10 years the not just millions, but the tens of millions, close to hundreds of millions of dollars that the DNR requested from the LCCMR, from bonding, from the general fund, from legacy funds to purchase lands for WMAs, SNAs, old growth areas. Meanwhile, they had been told in a legislative report that Representative Carlson did help me out on this issue. I have to give him credit. In 1998, I believe, appropriated money for the Office of the Legislative Auditor to do a study. And in the study it said, I believe, that the DNR was buying all these other lands before they were buying out the non-productive lands that they were holding in old growth and in SNAs and in WMAs, etc. And that's why this language is in here, because they had a fiscal responsibility as the trustee to do that. And I don't think that the people, the people at the DNR understand, and the bureaucracy over there, that it's their duty to raise money, and if it can't be raised off of those lands, they should come here and ask for that money first. And I think that that is a good use of the legacy funding. And when you bug the legacy, the Lessard Sams Council, you end up on the sidelines like my buddy right here, who actually did buck them, and then I think wasn't on the Lessard Sams Council the next time. But again, I digress. Lake Vermilion, a proposal by Governor Pawlenty, you are right, a proposal that I stood up on this House floor and opposed, a proposal that I told Chair Carlson in his Finance Committee, why aren't we trading land with U.S. Steel? You were in charge then. You were the chair of the Environment and Natural Resource Finance Committee. You could have done that. You didn't do it. I don't know your reasons why. I think you had good intentions, and I'm not questioning your intention, but I think the point here is that everybody thinks this land belongs for all of us to enjoy, and that is not the purpose of this land. It's to raise money. So we could have made $18 million bucks. We didn't make a penny. We gave it to U.S. Steel. Thirdly, would Representative Dill yield for a question? Because Representative Dill yield for a question?
He yields. Representative Rukavina.
Representative Dill, wake up over there, would you? And Representative Wagenius, you brought up the point that there's a notion around here that you can make money off of timber. And you don't think that's correct. I don't agree with you. Representative Dill, if you yield for a question?
He yields. Representative Rukavina.
Dill, you've got a farm north of Orr, you got a lot of trees on that farm. I've been there. If Killer Glowacki came to you and told you, I'm going to give you $35 a cord, and you had 1,000 cords, and you're a great capitalist, I love you for it, how much would you get from Killer Glowacki if he told you you were going to get $35 a cord and you had 1,000 cords?
The member from St. Louis, Representative Dill.
Well, Representative Rukavina, I'm not going to do that math on the fly because I wouldn't sell it for $35 a cord. I might take 90 when it was at its highest and pay for my kids' college education. How's that?
The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Members, I told you he was a good capitalist. Because you would get, what is that, 35 grand? Or is it, I don't even know, 350? 35 grand. Members, listen to this. From 1980 to 1991, the Department of Natural Resources sold the kids' aspen for $40, $50, $30, up to $90 a cord, and for 11 years they put zero in the fund. No, they could have made, even if they wanted to be real crooks, they could have given the kids $15 or $20 a cord, and there would have been $25, $35, $45, $55 million more in that corpus. But they put zero. And I raised holy hell with them, members. And by 1996 or 7, and even in the early 2000s, Representative Dietrich, when they were showing you, remember they were bragging that they were putting 30% of the value of that timber. And then, all of a sudden, it went back down to about zero. No, Representative Wagenius, people that own stumpage, just like people that own acreage and rent it out, when they're told they're getting X dollars a cord or X dollars an acre, that's what they get. They don't get zero. That's abuse. The Department of Natural Resources has had chance after chance after chance to correct their ways. And I don't want to accuse anybody of being an apologist or an enabler here, but I think the abuse has gone on long enough, and we've given them another chance in this bill because they're still basically kind of in charge. So I would hope that there are more votes, Representative Simon, than the 104 that were for this bill when it went out of here, because, again, the school kids deserve to be treated better by the legislators sitting here in this body.
The member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Rukavina, I would call Representative Dill a great capitalist with his attitude. And Representative McNamara, I see he's not here right now, but I can tell you that no, you cannot make any money logging on a boat ramp. But from the discussion that I've heard since I've gotten here about the school trust lands, we could just as well have been logging on boat ramps from the amount of money that the DNR has put into the school trust accounts. To me, this is a very, very significant day in our body. We're doing great work here in a bipartisan way. And to Representative Dietrich, congratulations. You have done a great job on this endeavor over the years. And to Representative Rukavina, I know that you've been passionate about this. I've heard you speak several times about it, and I commend you for that. Representative O'Driscoll, you're carrying a great bill. Keep working on it. And I also want to thank Representative McNamara for the great work that he's done. Members, let me say this. If you hired a fiduciary to manage a fund for your students, your kids, to go to college, and you were getting the return on your investment that the kids of the state of Minnesota are getting on our school trust lands, you'd find somebody else to manage your trust. And that's what we're doing here. In the information that was handed out earlier, there's a letter, and in the last paragraph on the first page, it talks about the plan and how the organization doesn't like it. And they say there that this muddies planning and decision-making to the point where simple management decisions could become mired in controversy. Members, that's what we have right now. We are correcting a problem that's been going on for far too long. I'd also like to address your attention to the conference committee report on 1.32. There's new language there. It talks about the school trust lands director. I have a suggestion for the school trust lands director, Representative Dietrich. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The representative from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm not going to rise to a point of order, but I do want to remind the Speaker of Rule 2.33. Rule 2.32, Order in Debate. Except for the member who offered the motion under consideration, a member must not speak more than twice on the subject without leave of the House, nor more than once until every other member wishing to speak on the subject had an opportunity to do so. And I just want to remind the Speaker of that so that when there's a debate going on, if other members seeking recognition can be called on. And again, I'm not going to rise to a point of order to the Speaker, just to want to make sure she knows about that rule. But, Madam Speaker and members, first of all, I want to say congratulations and thank you to my good friend from Champlin, Representative Dietrich. Representative Dietrich, if your legislative career were a sundae, this would be the perfect cherry on top. You've been working on this for years. You've been a pit bull. And I'm glad to see, you're leaving us at the end of this year, and I'm glad that we have taken action and we've taken some positive steps in the right direction, and it would not have happened without, in addition to your work this year, but the work that you did in the years in advance of this. And I just want to say thank you. The state of Minnesota is better off because of your service in this chamber and the work that you did in the previous years, and thank you very much. In addition, I want to thank, back in 2005, I remember being in a committee hearing as a young sleepy-eyed freshman and seeing Representative Rukavina talking about this subject, and it kind of made sense to me. It was actually, I was surprised by it. It was a good idea, and I went back and did some research on it, and sure enough, everything he was talking about was right. And Representative Rukavina, you lit a fire under quite a few members back in 2005. We had a large freshman class back then as well, and just now we are seeing the fruits of your labor in terms of getting members motivated to that. And again, as I said about Representative Dietrich, I think in many ways you sort of planted the seeds for many members being motivated and excited about this issue, and I want to say thanks. But also I do want to point out that in bureaucracy, in government, sometimes it needs a little bit of cleaning. And you go up, and it's like at your house, you got to go up in the attic and you got to clean things out. You got to take out the old boxes. You got to clean up the dust and get a little sunlight shine in there. And that's what we're doing today, members. I think that the bill, this certainly is a positive step in the right direction. I think there's more work to be done. This legislature and future legislators are going to have to remain vigilant on this. They're going to have to stay active and involved to make sure that we're getting the good proceeds out of these dollars so they're intended. And for those who want to use these lands for bird watching or preservation, that's fine. You just got to pay for it. You can't do it for free. And so I think I'm very proud of the work that Representative O'Driscoll and the members of the conference committee have put together. This is a very good bill, and I would urge members to vote green. Thank you.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Dill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Garofalo took most of what I was going to say and said it. So I will say what I said in 2002 when I was elected to a group of people at Fortune Bay. I said, I don't know what my legislative career will hold, but I do know that if there's any such thing as a legacy of a legislator, and I will never claim to have a legacy here, I want to see the Boundary Waters land exchange completed so that the kids have the use of their land for their purposes and good. And that would be a legacy of the Minnesota legislature and the federal government if that could be completed. I later learned, after coming here, the appalling circumstances that were going on with trust lands, mainly through Representative Rukavina. And I thought to myself, well, let's add to the legacy. And as I stand here today, I see two significant bills coming forward. Now, I want to ask the members that are going to vote no against this, because of this little reason or that little reason, how many bills do we pass off this House floor that aren't for veterans, that aren't perfect out of the chute? And we don't pass very many. And we'll need to make adjustments in the future, but at least this is a huge step in the right direction. I actually voted against this bill at one point, or a similar bill to this at one point, because I didn't think it was good enough. But I told Representative Dietrich a long time ago, when they came forward with a bill that made significant progress and made sense, that I would be supporting it. And I think that goes towards what I said in 2002 when I was first elected, and I will be supporting it, and we'll keep making wood for people's houses and tables and number 2 pencils and And we'll keep making the equipment so that the environmental community can lobby this Capitol till you know what freezes over, so that they can have the minerals to make those computers and iPhones and copy machines and all of that stuff work. So I'd like to see you vote for the bill.
Any further discussion? There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Oh, excuse me. The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to just share some final comments and thoughts on this. Back in January of 2011, like a lot of my counterparts, I took an oath of office that said that I would uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, as well as the Constitution here of the state of Minnesota. And today we have that opportunity to once again fulfill that obligation and that oath that we took. I got assigned to the Education Committee, Education Reform, and I sat next to a woman by the name of Representative Carol McFarland. And we struck up a conversation, and she said, you know, if you want to do some things in education and reform, I got to introduce you to Denise Dietrich, Representative Dietrich. So Representative Dietrich and myself and Representative McFarland started out on the education of my legislative career. And that is to learn more about the school trust lands, how they work, how they benefit the kids of the state of Minnesota, and how we can make this a better process. This time last year, in the hustle and bustle of trying to wrap up the session, Representative Dietrich offered an amendment saying, let's take care of the trust lands right here, right now, not vetted through a community, because she saw the atrocities that were going on. She said, Representative O'Driscoll, what do you think we should do? And I said, let's run it. We had some debate on it at that time, we had some discussion, but we also had, more importantly, a promise from Chairs Garofalo and Chair McNamara that this session that we are about to complete today, well, not today, this session that we are in right now, that we're about to complete soon, would take this matter up, would take it seriously, and give it the due that it's necessary. And ladies and gentlemen, that is exactly what we have done as a team moving forward, executing our fiduciary obligations. No lobbyist, no special interest group brought this forward. It was organically brought forward by a member in this chamber for the benefit of the kids for whom this property is intended. The other thing that I think is very important to be looking at as we move forward on this is this may well be the largest bipartisanly supported piece of legislation this session, if not this biennium, both in the House and the Senate. That is not a housekeeping or details type bill. I'm very proud of the work that we have done. I'm very proud of our Senate counterparts and Senator Cruz, who championed this bill on the Senate side. And as they passed it off the floor with a large margin, and as we did, we've worked together in conference committee to get things done. And as I wrap up, I'd like to also thank the conferees, Representative Simon, McElpatrick, McNamara, but most of all, I'd like to thank Representative Dietrich for teaching me what the trust lands were. And as she leaves, and the good Lord willing, the creek doesn't rise, I'm back next January, I will take that legacy and I will carry it forward, and I will make you proud of not only me, but this entire body. And members, with that, I encourage you to vote yes today.
Any further discussion? There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 110 ayes, and 21 nays. The bill is repassed and is as amended by conference, and its title agreed to. Announcements by the Speaker. Announcement by the Speaker. Two announcements.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on House File 2171. Hackbarth, Biskins, Cornish, McNamara, and Dill. Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on Senate File 1143. Scott, Holberg, and Simon.
Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1933. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1933, number 32 on the calendar for today, an act relating to health care.
The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt. The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker and members, Senate File 1933 has been described in committee as it came through the process as a really big idea. And members, it really is. The Health Care Compact is a way for Minnesota to seize control of health care, and not in a manner that necessarily pokes the eye of the federal government or says no to anything, but that acknowledges that Minnesota does an outstanding job with health care and health care reform. Members, Minnesota has some of the highest quality, lowest cost per capita in the entire nation, some of the highest insurance rates, coverage rates in the nation, some of the best public programs in the nation, and we have been frustrated over and over again, and discussed that many times on the House floor here, that the rules that come attached with federal funding prevent Minnesota from doing many of the good things we know we can and would like to do on behalf of people in need in Minnesota. Members, the Health Care Compact is an opportunity for Minnesota to cut those strings and receive those funds from the federal government and do with it what Minnesota knows how to do best. And that's do the best by the people of Minnesota. The Health Care Compact is actually something that is under federal law. I know I've heard some people ask us, are we looking at trying to cede from the union? Are we trying to be unconstitutional? Members, this is absolutely constitutional. In fact, if you take a look at Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution, it speaks directly to compacts. There are literally hundreds of them in our economy that states have entered into for various ways of seizing control and directing their own destiny in terms of certain aspects of our economy. This is another example. We have 4 states in the nation that have already passed this. 2 others have passed it and are waiting for their governor's signature. All it requires is 2 states. And I would point out, members, that this bill before us today simply says that Minnesota is going to join with those other states in asking Congress for permission. We have to eventually go to Congress for permission to go ahead and form this compact. If we do, the federal government then block grants the federal funds for health care programs to the state of Minnesota at 2010 levels, and then with an inflator increasing it over time. But it literally block grants those dollars, giving Minnesota control of them. So you've heard tell of the global waiver. Some of you remember discussion of that last year. And you've heard many, many discussions about various waivers we're seeking from the federal government so that we can do health care and health care reform the way we need to do it, the way we know how to do it best. This is the ultimate global waiver. This is the ultimate global waiver. So by joining with these states and going to the federal government for permission, to Congress, we get those dollars block granted. It's about $13.5 billion, billion with a B, members, for Medicaid and children and families under Minnesota Care. Medicaid and children and families under Minnesota Care. $13.5 billion. So imagine what the state of Minnesota could do if the federal government gave us that money and said, Minnesota, do what you do best. You know, they already turn to us for so many other things as an example when they're looking for reforms and ways of doing things better and more efficiently and effectively. Again, members, this is an opportunity for Minnesota to have the ultimate global waiver to do what it does best. And I would remind you again, this is not a partisan issue. This bill is not presented as a poke in the eye to the ACA. It's not a poke in the eye to the federal government. It's simply acknowledging what we already know. And that's that Minnesota has the tools at its disposal and the track record of success in terms of quality and cost effectiveness in health care to do better, frankly, than the federal government can do. Members, I'll walk through the bill a little bit. The first portion of the bill is simply the section on definitions. Then we have Article 2. It's a pledge. It says that the states who are members of this compact will take action to secure the consent of U.S. Congress to this compact in order to return the authority to regulate health care to the member states. Now, some people have asked, does this mean that Minnesota is now ceding control over health care to a compact of states? No, it is not. This group of states forms a compact simply to go to the federal government and request permission to get its own control over those health care dollars. Once we have that, if Congress approves it, subject to whatever terms Congress applies to that, the state of Minnesota then determines how it will spend that money. We don't have to go back to the other states for permission. We can make that decision ourselves. We can set aside federal rules and regulations that impact the spending of those dollars and do it Minnesota's way. Article 3 is legislative power. States that the legislatures of the member states have primary responsibility to regulate health care in their respective states. Again, we would have control. It allows each member state to suspend the federal laws and rules and regulations that we've talked about. Those strings that come attached with the federal dollars that make it difficult for us to enact real reforms in the state of Minnesota. Article 5 discusses the funding. I've mentioned it would be a block granting of funds starting at the 2010 level, about $13.5 billion. And I would point out, members, as long as we're talking about funding, questions about a fiscal note. Keep in mind this bill is simply the step of Minnesota joining with other states to ask for permission from Congress to do this. So there is no cost, and if I had the fiscal note here to pass out, I've got it right here. There is no fiscal impact. So a fiscal note was done, there is no fiscal impact. But again, the funds are block granted to the state of Minnesota, giving us the ability to determine how those dollars are going to be spent. Requires the U.S. Congress, by the way, to, as a primary responsibility, make sure that those funds are available to Minnesota. So the federal government must make sure that those dollars are coming to Minnesota. That's another part of this compact. The Interstate Advisory Healthcare Commission is formed. That's a means by which the states, working together, make sure that the compact goes forward. It doesn't mean, again, that this commission has any say over how Minnesota spends the dollars. That's Article 6. Article 7 is congressional consent. Again, only 2 member states of the compact are necessary to go to Congress. We already have 4. 2 more have already passed it. That's 6. Minnesota would be 7. The goal is to actually get to 20, 21, 22, 23, maybe 25 states before this actually goes to Congress. And finally, Article 8 discusses how amendments to the compact are done, and then Article 9 about how you could withdraw or dissolve the compact. Again, just to remind members, Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution says, in part, it's in the last paragraph, no state shall without consent of Congress enter into any compact or agreement, any agreement or compact. And so this is in our Constitution, the opportunity to do this. Again, it's been done hundreds of times in other parts of our economy. We're simply looking for that opportunity for Minnesota, the flexibility to spend that money starting at $13.5 billion to take care of Medicaid patients and Minnesota Care patients, families and children in a way that we know how to do best. Members, with that, Madam Speaker, members, I think I'll take questions. And again, I would encourage a green vote. I think this is a big idea. It's a nonpartisan idea. It's an idea that gives Minnesota control over its own health care destiny.
There is an amendment at the desk. Representative Atkins, or excuse me.
Atkins moving to amend Senate File 1933 as follows. The amendment is coded 978.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, first is just a point on the bill, and that is one thing I learned pretty early on. There's certain things you just don't mess with, and you don't mess with my mama's Medicare, Representative Gottwalt, which is exactly what this bill does. I'm going to go to the amendment, though. The amendment is very simple, and it's important to point out what this bill doesn't do. What it doesn't do is the one thing that we need to do this session, which is address the issue of a health insurance exchange. And it fails to do that. If we fail to act in setting up the framework for a health insurance exchange, then Representative Gottwalt, we're going to have the opposite happen as to what you're describing here in the bill. We're going to have the federal government impose upon us a health insurance exchange. So you take all of our time to mess with Medicare and with VA and all the various things that you're doing in your bill, and you ignore the one thing that we have to do, Representative Gottwalt, which is establish the framework for a health insurance exchange. If we fail to do that, the feds will do that. So I just want to make sure that we're clear. I've got an amendment here that says nothing in this compact is intended to satisfy the mandates of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act or establish the framework for a health insurance exchange. It will be an open acknowledgement, if we support this amendment, that we have not taken any steps to establish the health insurance exchange, Representative Gottwalt, and that we're now, 3 days, Madam Speaker, from adjournment, or 4 days? And the one thing we came here to do on this topic, it's Minnesota Business Partnership, Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, all sorts of small businesses, MCCL. There's any number of organizations that want us to do one thing in the world of health insurance. You've ignored them altogether. And what the amendment does is just demonstrate that that's exactly what this bill is doing. And Madam Speaker, I would request a roll call on this amendment, please.
Representative Atkins requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. I'd appreciate a green vote.
The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, members, Representative Atkins, just because you say it doesn't make it true. This bill doesn't deal with Medicare. It doesn't touch Medicare. Medicare is a direct federal program. None of these dollars, Representative Atkins, if you knew the bill and you understood what you're doing before you put an amendment on, deal with Medicare. As I pointed out, members, this amendment that Representative Atkins is putting on the floor is completely unnecessary. Number one, Representative Atkins, I wish I was as sure as you are that the federal government is going to, in fact, force Minnesota to do its bidding from Washington. I don't know that that's true. I think that could, in fact, change dramatically over the next couple of months. But members, what this bill does is take Minnesota out of that altogether. The Health Care Compact removes Minnesota from federal regulation of health care dollars in the area of Medicaid and Minnesota Care, where it impacts families and kids. Now, this is exactly the point. Minnesotans, in the majority, do not want the federal government dictating our health care future. And Representative Atkins, being somebody who's on the Commerce Committee and understanding commerce, you might be aware that Minnesota already has online shopping tools for health insurance. That's what people keep selling, is we got to have health insurance exchanges mandated by the federal government because we don't have them in Minnesota. Well, we do. We have the tools. We have the tools. The federal government is telling us we must have a high-risk pool. Minnesota has a high-risk pool, our own high-risk pool. It's called the Minnesota Comprehensive Health Association. Members were told by the federal government under Obamacare that we must have an essential benefit set. And what we find is we already have mandated benefits for all insurance coverage in Minnesota that accomplish the same goal. We have a subsidy program called the Healthy Minnesota Contribution Program that provides state funds to help people who can't otherwise afford it purchase health insurance. Again, we don't need the federal government stepping in a massive way that is bankrupting states, that's going to bankrupt our nation, and force us to do what we're already capable of doing. The Healthcare Compact simply allows Minnesota to take those dollars, cut the strings of federal regulation, and do it in a way that makes sense. And by the way, Representative Atkins, it does not mess with your grandma's Medicare. It doesn't mess with mine either. I look forward to that someday as well. So, members, there's absolutely no need for Representative Atkins' amendment. I mean, it's intended to be kind of a poke in the eye to say, hey, you're not doing your job. No, in fact, Minnesota is doing its job. And it's this constant uncertainty about what the federal government's going to do that's driving people nuts. Ask the Chamber of Commerce members in the state, Madam Speaker and members. What's preventing them from spending money? What's preventing them from changing things? They're scared to death about what this thing is or isn't going to do to them. The so-called Affordable Care Act, which is going to drive up the cost of health care by well over $1 trillion in the next 10 years. So, members, reject this amendment, vote no. Let's give Minnesota the real independence, the tools to do what it does best.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Huntley.
Madam Speaker and members, I'm going to lead up to the amendment, but I will have to lay my groundwork first. And the only good thing about this bill is it has an accurate title. Senate File Number 1933. If anybody knows history, they'll know that 1933 was not a very good year. Representative Gottwalt, I think you ought to read your bill. If you go to Article 4, it says each member state within its state may suspend by legislation the operation of all federal laws, rules, regulations, and orders regarding health care that are inconsistent with the laws and regulations adopted by the member state. And then, Madam Speaker, if you go back to Article 1 in definitions, one of the definitions is an individual or group plan that provides or pays the cost of care, services, or supplies related to the health of an individual, except any care, services, supplies, or plans provided by the United States Department of Defense, the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, or provided to Native Americans. Well, that leaves a lot of people. An individual or group plan. Madam Speaker, members, there's no exclusion for Medicare. Medicare is a health plan. And why the Tea Party people would support this, I don't know. I remember the famous statement at one of the Tea Party rallies where the gentleman got up and said, keep your blank blank hands off of my blank blank government hands off of my Medicare. Apparently he did not know that Medicare was a government plan. And nothing in this language of this bill excludes Medicare. Nothing in this bill excludes regulation of self-insured and ERISA. Nothing in this bill excludes the fact that we can also regulate Taft-Hartley plans. And in fact, nothing in the bill, the way it's written, can exclude anything that we want to do with the health insurance of federal employees unless they happen to work for the Department of Defense or the Veterans Administration or the American Indian Healthcare System. So we can regulate, according to this bill, all federal employees that get health insurance in the state of Minnesota, and we can do whatever we want with it. And that includes Representative Atkins' mother. Lastly, the block grants, the way the bill is written, and apparently Representative Gottwalt hasn't read it, but the block grants, the way the bill is written, would include Medicare, medical assistance, and the federal employees even, health insurance. And lastly, what it does is set up basically a new federal government in this country to run health care through another system. Do we really need another bureaucracy to tell us how to run our health care? This bill, as I said, the only good thing about it is it's Title 1933.
Any discussion to the amendment? The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins, to your amendment.
And Madam Speaker, I think Representative Dean had a comment. I just wanted to give a final 15 seconds on it, but I'll defer to Representative Dean.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Madam Speaker, Representative Atkins, I'm sorry, I was just pulled away, but why are you proposing this amendment? I really don't understand the purpose for this, and I'm wondering which. You say nothing in this compact is intended to satisfy the mandates of the Patient Protection and Affordability Care Act or establish a framework for a health care
Madam Speaker,
exchange.
a point of parliamentary inquiry. What should a member do when he can't hear another member?
Oops, I don't know how.
And I think it might just be Representative Dean isn't speaking into his microphone, but I can't hear anything that he's saying.
Representative Atkins, Representative Dean, if you could speak a little bit louder for the members, please. Representative Dean from Washington.
Madam Speaker, if Representative Atkins would yield to a question.
Representative Atkins yields. Representative Dean.
Representative Atkins, can you tell me which portions of the Patient Protection Affordability Act this deals with that you are concerned about and how they interact with state-based delivery of health care in the state of Minnesota?
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Madam Speaker, if I understood Representative Dean's question, the whole thing deals with state-based health care. And I know, Representative Dean, you weren't on the floor when Representative Gottwalt, maybe the question should go to him, but the entire bill addresses state-based health care. What he's trying to suggest is that Minnesota have the ability to control things like Medicare, what Representative Huntley just walked through. That's what the amendment goes to as well, and I just wanted to make sure that we were clear, and with apologies to the rest of the members who were on the floor, Representative Dean, the point that I was trying to make with the amendment is that the one thing we should be doing this session relative to health care is the top priority of the Minnesota Business Partnership, the top priority of the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, the top priority for MCCL, and that is to make sure that the feds don't impose a health insurance exchange upon us, which means what we have to do here in this state is adopt the framework for a health insurance exchange. Failing to do that, this session, which is running out in the next 72 hours or so, failing to do that will cause the feds to come in and impose a health insurance exchange upon us. I would rather have a Minnesota-made, a Minnesota-grown version of a health insurance exchange, a competitive marketplace where small business people and individuals can purchase their health insurance. And what this bill does, and I think we're very clear based on what Representative Gottwalt has said, is that it doesn't satisfy that requirement. It makes some sense to establish that in the bill itself. Take a green vote on this. Indicate that, and then if you're just going to wash your hands of the whole concept of doing the framework for a health insurance exchange, basically what you are doing is deferring to the governor to do it by executive order. I would much rather do it on our own than have it be done by the executive branch. But if that's what you're all trying to do, then that's what you're able to do. by failing to take any action with respect to it. I think that answers your question, but the fact is, Representative Dean, I could only hear a portion of it because you don't speak into the microphone. And number two is it wasn't a very clear question, but hopefully I've answered every conceivable question. Maybe Representative Gottwalt can further explain what the intention of his bill is so that you'll have the benefit of hearing that. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Dean.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Adkins, I think I'm fairly clear on the intent of your amendment, which is not to improve the bill, which is not to talk about a health care exchange, but to do a little poke in the eye. I didn't get to do my exchange. I understand that. You might feel bad about that. I might want to embarrass Representative Gottwalt. That might be the intent of that.
Point of order.
If we could pause for a moment. Representative Liebling from Olmsted, can you state your point of order, please?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to a point of order under Mason's 1.24, arraigning the motives of a member, and this has happened the second time on this floor during this debate. I didn't rise the first time. I let it go, but I think that we're getting this poke in the eye stuff is getting a little bit too far into that territory, and I would ask you to advise the members not to arraign the motives of another member.
Members, if we could please just keep the noise level down and be mindful of each other, that would be great. Representative Dean, you have the floor. If you could please continue.
Madam Speaker, I would like to speak in favor of the Liebling point of order. That's exactly what I was doing. I am 100% guilty of that. I apologize, and I stand corrected, Representative Liebling. Moving on to Representative Adkins, I think that the intent of your amendment is clear. Your understanding of health care and its delivery is obviously not. Your understanding of politics is suspect within this amendment, Representative Adkins. So I hope you can hear me clearly now, Representative Adkins. And I think I now understand the intent of your amendment.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to offer an oral amendment to the Atkins amendment.
State your oral amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And if the Chief Clerk could repeat this back so we've got it correctly, it would be to strike everything between and including the words satisfy on line 1.5 and or on line 1.6.
The clerk will report the oral amendment.
Downey moving to amend the Atkins amendment, coded 978, on page 1, line 5, delete satisfy the mandates of the Patient Protection, and in line 6, delete and Affordable Care Act or.
To your amendment, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I was just tuning into the debate a little bit late, and I think if I understand maybe the good intent of Representative Atkins, most of us would probably agree that we don't want this compact to somehow be intended to establish the health insurance exchange. However, I think pretty clearly the intent of the author is that it would establish a statewide more broad implementation of overall healthcare systems and structures, and so taking out this notion that somehow we'd be satisfying the mandates of Obamacare makes a lot of sense to me, and I think most of us could probably agree with this, with the Atkins amendment if it were amended as I've described. So with that, Madam Speaker.
Discussion to the oral amendment. The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Downey. It's up to the author of the oral amendment, but I'd be happy to just incorporate that into my amendment or to support your oral amendment. I think that's a fine idea.
Okay. All right, we're back to the Atkins amendment as amended, or incorporated, I should say, as modified. Any further discussion to the amendment? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. Clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 2 nays, the amendment is passed. To the bill. Discussion. The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Madam Speaker, members, I need to at least correct a couple of things that were stated during the debate on that amendment. Representative Huntley, just because you say it doesn't make it so either. Your interpretation of this bill doesn't fit with the fiscal note at all. It doesn't fit with the fiscal note at all. If you read Article 4, it says each member state within its state may, it's permissive, suspend by legislation the operation of all federal laws, rules, regulations, etc., etc. Now, the $13.5 billion that is cited in the assumptions in the fiscal note understands only state public programs with federal dollars. That's Medicaid and Minnesota Care with children and families. That's what we've been told. It doesn't involve Medicare. As much as you want to say it, that's not listed in here anywhere. It doesn't say Minnesota's taking over Medicare. All right? And as I pointed out earlier, too, members, this, if it's passed, if this is approved by Congress, this releases us from federal regulations, including the ACA. So all this fear and alarm over we're not going to pass an exchange, we're not going to comply with the ACA, we're not going to fall for the gun against our head, we're not going to do that. All that fear and alarm is exactly what this is meant to get around, along with all of the strings attached to federal regulations that have prevented Minnesota from enacting the kind of real reforms we'd like to make in our public programs. So, Madam Speaker and members, I just wanted to set that record straight. I'm sure it's obvious Representative Huntley is up. He's going to try to argue again that this does involve Medicare. But members, if you have the fiscal note in front of you, you could take a look at it. The dollar amount does not equate to Medicare in Minnesota. It equates to Medicaid and the people who are in Minnesota Care who receive federal funding. Those are the dollars we're talking about. And however else you want to interpret it is fine, but I'm telling you what's in the bill, and I'm telling you what was determined in the assumptions for the fiscal note for this bill, members.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1933, as amended.
The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and members. Representative Gottwalt, I don't know if you want to address this or not, but I do have some concerns with this bill, and it's at the 30,000-foot level, Representative Gottwalt. I guess I'm wondering why we would need to enter into a compact with other states to then request of the federal government permission to do something the federal government has no say over in the first place. In other words, by passing this, are we then sending the message to the U.S. Supreme Court that we do believe, in fact, that the federal government has some role in health care in the state of Minnesota, and therefore we have to go to the federal government to request permission to take care of our own health care rules, regulations, etc. In other words, it's kind of like me having to go to government to ask for permission to eat breakfast cereal in the morning versus bacon and eggs. Well, that's my decision, and if I have to go to the government or even pretend or believe I have to, then I am capitulating and saying the federal government indeed has some role in, or state government or whatever, some role in telling me what I get to eat for breakfast. And I don't believe that. So that's my concern at again, the 30,000-foot level. Why do we have to go to the federal government to request permission to do what the U.S. Constitution already gives us the inalienable right to do and control?
Member from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think Representative Biskins was asking me to yield, and I will yield, and we'll just go right through that. Well, Representative Biskins, at the 30,000-foot level, as I mentioned earlier, this is not about the federal government telling us what to do vis-a-vis the ACA, for example, Obamacare. This is Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution. Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution says that states shall not enter into a compact without permission of Congress. And the compact allows us, through that construct, to absolve ourselves from those strings and controls of the federal government. But it does say in Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution that we have to seek congressional permission. Not presidential permission, by the way. If Congress approves this, the President does not need to authorize it. So we are combining with other states and saying we want control over those dollars the federal government currently controls and directs so that we can spend those dollars in the way we know is best for Minnesota. And I would point out again, members, this is very critical. It's a critical point about this bill. You know, we have surrendered control over our health care destiny time and time again under federal government programs. And this is an opportunity, the big idea that I mentioned at the outset, for Minnesota to take control of its health care destiny, do the things it knows how to do best with the dollars coming from the federal government, without the strings attached. So it is exactly designed to say you can have your steak and eggs, or you can have your Wheaties, or you can have whatever you want for breakfast, Representative Biskins. That's what we're doing. We're seizing control of that and saying, Minnesotans, and to the comment earlier about keep your hands off of our health care, we want the federal government to keep its hands off of our health care because Minnesota does it best. We can do it even better if we have control of that $13.5 billion.
The member from Douglas, Representative Franson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, Minnesota has the best health care system in the world, but we need to make it more accessible and affordable through competition in the health care insurance market, not through a government takeover. And I truly believe that government-run health care limits treatment options and leads to rationing. And with that said, I believe that this bill is a great way to address that. And Kathy Lomer and I, we went to Texas not too long ago to learn about the health care compact, and we were very eager to learn. And many people from all over the state and country were present. And Kathy Lomer and I got to talk to some representatives from Ohio. One was representative, one was his campaign manager. And we had a nice little conversation, and being me and nosy about what side of the aisle people are on, I asked the campaign manager if he was a Republican. And he started laughing, and he said, "No, I'm a socialist." And imagine my surprise when I had a real live socialist in front of me, and I was a little uncomfortable, and I had to ask him if he was kidding. And he said, "Nope, I'm not kidding at all." And so I looked at the representative that he was the manager for, and I said, "Are you a socialist too?" And he goes, "Well, I ran as a Democrat because that's how you get elected." And that was shocking, I must have to say, but they were very honest. It was an interesting conversation on why they were socialists. But nonetheless, I asked them why they were interested in the health care compact. And their reasoning for their support of the health care compact was they wanted to have single-payer health insurance, and that's why they were interested, and they believed that if the health care compact was passed and approved by the federal government, that they would be able to achieve their goals. Members, I am not in any way, shape, or form endorsing a single-payer health care market, but I'm just giving you the other side of why some were interested in this particular piece of legislation. Thank you for your time.
The member from Dakota, Representative Wardlow.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this bill is an innovative way to address a problem we have here in Minnesota that many other states share. The problem is this, that the federal government has far exceeded its powers, its enumerated powers under Article 1 of the Constitution, in a vast array of areas. The most pressing example presently of this phenomenon is in the arena of health care. Now, members, Representative Biskins was absolutely correct when he stated that the state already has the power and the sole power and the plenary power to regulate health care. And Minnesota is a laboratory of democracy that is ahead of the class, if you will, one of the best states in delivering health care services and fostering a free market in health care. We certainly have a long way to go in that regard. I think we can do some good innovative reforms in Minnesota that are oriented toward a free market in health care that will actually allow people to purchase the health care they need and that they want and have the care provided by the providers that they choose. And this allows Minnesota to do that. But Representative Biskins was right. Members, if you look at page 3 of the bill, Article 3, this compact, we'll call it the compact, it states that the legislatures of the member states have the primary responsibility to regulate health care in their respective states. And then in Article 4 it goes on to say that states may suspend by legislation operation of federal laws in the arena of health care that conflict with laws of the member state. If you remember your constitutional history, members, and look at the Bill of Rights, the 9th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution states that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. This provision, that the Constitution does not disparage rights retained by the people by the enumeration of certain rights, that provision is found in a number of state constitutions across the country, and in a number of the original 13 colonies, state constitutions once the United States was founded and state constitutions were adopted. And remember, members, that state constitutions were a very new thing. The idea of a written constitution was kind of innovation at the time. And what did the people that wrote this phrase, that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be meant to disparage or deny others retained by the people, what does that mean? Well, members, our founding fathers...
Members, if we could keep the noise level down, there's members that are having difficulty hearing. Representative Wardlow.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, our founding fathers understood what these words mean, and they meant this. They included property rights, the right to possess, to acquire, to control, and to convey property. And they also include the concept of economic liberty, which is very closely associated with property rights. And economic liberty embraces health care, the right to choose and purchase the health care you want or the health insurance you want. So, members, this is a right that the Constitution reserves to the people, or, under the 10th Amendment, to the states. So Minnesota already has the right to do this. But when the federal government is overreaching, as it is now, and has been for quite some time, for at least 80 years, after we have gone down a long path since the New Deal of legislation that pushes the boundaries of the original conceptions of the limits on constitutional power since FDR's court packing plan, once we go down that path, and having been down that path, members, we need to find ways to push back at the federal government. And that is exactly what our founding fathers intended. That the states would be a check, members, on the tyranny of the federal government. I'll use that word again, as I did in a debate a few weeks back. The soft tyranny of laws that overreach and regulations that are too numerous to be read and too long to be understood. How do we push back? The founding fathers thought, well, if the states retain their authority, they are themselves a check on federal power. With this health care compact, we are pushing back at the federal government and saying, federal government, Minnesota knows how to run its health care system. The people of Minnesota have the right to purchase the health care they want to. Free markets work. Free enterprise is the path to prosperity. And we are taking back the power that rightfully belongs to us, to the people of Minnesota, and to this body in the first instance. So please support this bill.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In one of those public speaking courses that I took one time, they said you should tell a story to begin your speech. I'm a 30-year member of my pipe fitters local. I'm going to tell two. Many years ago, when I first got into the local, there were premature twins born, and they shot right through the ceiling that we had placed on our health insurance. That because we are a Taft-Hartley controlled insurance plan, we had the ability to override that. And we took care of those two twins, our group of members. We voted on the floor of our organization, democratically raised our hand and said aye. Some really nasty people that we didn't like said nay. But we took care of those twins. And then during this time when we had great unemployment, we took another vote on that union floor to expand mental health coverage for our members in the event somebody needed it. So members, my union plan is covered by Taft-Hartley. Two good Republican senators from Ohio, almost as good as Davis-Bacon, but I won't go there. Representative Gottwalt, I've got a question for you, if you would be so kind. So would you yield to a question?
Representative Gottwalt yields. Representative Mahoney.
Representative Gottwalt, in Article 4, each state within its state may suspend by legislation. Now, I understand may, the operation of all federal rules, laws, rules, regulations, and orders regarding the health care plan. So, at that point, I'll turn back to page 2, line 2.5. An individual or group plan that provides or pays the cost of care, service, or supplies related to health care of an individual. If we pass this, does that mean you have the ability, with this bill, we have the ability, I guess it would be a law that the states pass, to override my union's health care plan, to deny my members and the members of any other fraternal organization, whether it's a union or it's an elk club or a moose club or a JC's club, Chamber of Commerce, would we have the rights and the ability to overturn their democratically decided health care plan? Is that what you're telling me in this particular bill? Because that's the way I read it.
The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Mahoney. I think you illustrate a very important point, and I'll answer your question in two stages. First of all, the rules and regulations that guide some of those things, not the union issues, of course, but that dictate to Minnesota things that we've been frustrated with, are now being made in Washington for public programs, and that's the second part of the answer. This is meant to apply to public programs. Okay, I've said that several times, and I don't know if I haven't been clear enough about it. But this applies to Medicaid and Minnesota care spending. It applies to health plans that the state administers, not that a union administers or that negotiates in the private sector. But right now, rules and regulations that come with funding are being made in Washington, D.C. by Congress. And the big idea behind this bill is those same funds and the strings that are attached to them come to Minnesota. And now it's Minnesota. It's you and me, Mr. Mahoney, Representative Mahoney, and the other members of this body and those who come after us who will make decisions about how those dollars are currently spent, how they will be spent in Minnesota for the benefit of our residents. So the question at the end of the day is, money that is being spent by Washington now for health care, will we as Minnesotans seize control of how those dollars are spent for the benefit of our residents? So the short answer to your question is no, it would not impact your situation. Now, there are people shaking their heads who think they know how to read this law better than others who've written it, presented it, debated it nationwide, but I'm telling you what it means. I'm telling you what the department has based their assumptions on about this bill. This involves federal dollars for public programs. It does not involve an intrusion of the state into using those dollars to control anything else. It is about the federal funds, members. So Representative Mahoney, if you don't have federal dollars flowing into that currently come from the federal government for health care programs, which is exactly what this bill speaks to specifically, it's not going to impact the people you're talking about. But at the end of the day, it will be up to Minnesota and the Minnesota legislature to decide how those dollars are spent, whether they will take care of somebody who blows through their inpatient maximum or their critical care maximum. And I would rather rely on us and our ability to take care of our people, Representative Mahoney, than, frankly, the federal government and Congress. And that's the big idea in this bill. But no, I don't read this bill, and I don't believe anybody else who's drafted it reads it, to say that it would have the ability to step in and control what you're talking about.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a couple more questions, so if Representative Gottwalt will continue to yield.
He will.
Representative Gottwalt, can you show me in this bill page and line number where it's telling me that it's only public plans, where it does not affect a Taft-Hartley plan? Can you tell me in there where it does that?
The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt.
Madam Speaker, Representative Mahoney, I'm not pointing out the exact line. What I'm trying to point out is the purpose of this bill and what it impacts through the compact is only federal funds. It's only the federal funds, Representative Mahoney. It does not give us control over everything under the sun. Show me the line in this bill that says it controls absolutely everything. It doesn't. This bill is specific to the federal dollars for programs like Medicaid and Minnesota Care. And I hope that answers the question as clearly as possible. If you think it needs to be put more clearly in this legislation, I would suggest you should have offered an amendment. But I'm telling you right now, that is what this bill applies to. It does not give us carte blanche to decide what happens with private dollars. Okay? I mean, it speaks directly to the federal government, and if you want me to find the lines, I will here. It speaks directly to Congress being required to provide funding. So it speaks directly to money appropriated by the federal government through Congress to pay for health care. And through that language in the bill, it speaks only to that. It doesn't say that through this bill, through a compact, Minnesota now has control over everything under the sun in health care. I mean, I hope that helps clarify it.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker.
Representative Khan.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to rise to a point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
I would like to introduce a former member who is visiting us today, former Representative Rick Kruger, who served with increasingly fewer members in this body, but we'd like to welcome him to visit us today.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it was something that Representative Gottwalt mentioned in his answer. So Representative Gottwalt will yield again.
He yields.
You said that all the people that are carrying this bill, or whatever, however you phrased it, is this another ALEC bill? Is this where this came out of, Representative Gottwalt? Is this another ALEC bill?
The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt.
Madam Speaker, Representative Mahoney, this is a bill I brought forward in the state legislature. All right? There's a coalition of states that want to do this, and they have a group doing that. I don't know if it came out of ALEC. I've got members going yes. I've got some saying no. That isn't the reason I brought it forward. I brought it forward for the reasons stated. And by the way, just to answer your previous question, if you read the bill, Article 5, it begins on line 3.13 and extends through line 3.26, speaks directly to the funding that this bill is all about. And if you look at it, it says for each federal fiscal year, each member state shall have the right to federal funds up to an amount equal to its member state current year funding level for that federal fiscal year, funded by the United States Congress. Now, the example you gave did not involve congressional or federal funding. By the start of each federal fiscal year, the United States Congress shall establish an initial member state current year funding level for each member state based upon reasonable estimates. This bill speaks to federal funding, and that was my point earlier. So I hope that answers the question. Whether this idea has been advanced by ALEC or not, this is a bill that I'm advancing because I think it's a great idea for the state of Minnesota.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And would Representative Gottwalt yield, please?
He yields. Representative Atkins.
And thank you, Madam Speaker. My question, Representative Gottwalt, somewhat mirrors what Representative Mahoney. I'm just curious, does the legislation have some connection to ALEC?
The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Atkins, I'm not sure why we're pursuing this course of questioning. This bill is my bill. It's not ALEC's bill. I mean, if you don't like the idea, you want to vote no on it, I understand, but why are we questioning motive here? This bill didn't come to me from ALEC in answer to your question.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Gottwalt. The reason I ask is because earlier you passed out a handout that says Gottwalt at the top, and it says Healthcare Compact, and there's a logo right in the middle of that page. And I went to the ALEC website, and there's exactly the same font, the same size, and the same logo. And that's why I was curious if it was ALEC, an ALEC piece of legislation. The reason I'm concerned about ALEC, and honestly, Madam Speaker, I don't know much about ALEC. I think maybe Representative Franzen, who talked about him earlier, or somebody did on the floor, maybe there can be a better explanation. But what I know is that in the last several days or weeks, we've seen companies like McDonald's pull out of ALEC, Coca-Cola pull out of ALEC, Pepsi pull out of ALEC. And it's not just fast food and sugary drinks that we're talking about. It's Kraft, which makes lots and lots of products. They pulled out of ALEC. Wendy's. And then the Blue Cross and Blue Shield pulled out of ALEC. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I think, was the most recent entity to pull out of ALEC. We had earlier in the session, and Representative Gottwalt, I am not in any way questioning your motives. I believe that you believe firmly in this bad piece of legislation. What I am questioning, though, is that we have had one piece after another of ALEC legislation, not just, I mean, literally it's verbatim. It's coming word for word from some organization that all of these groups are pulling out of, and it makes me question whether or not the sort of legislation that they are supporting makes sense for us to do here in Minnesota. So when I see a handout like this, Representative Gottwalt, it calls into question the viability of the legislation, not the believability about your motives and the credibility of you in any way. But it does make me nervous to start talking about legislation that is supported by an organization that many of the members are pulling out of. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Huntley.
Well, Madam Speaker, it is not what Representative Gottwalt intended. It's what the language says. And let me try to explain to the members 2 points. One, it's in definitions of what's health care, and then Article 4 about what we can do with health care. Okay, and there are 2 places that health care is mentioned in the definitions. And it says, and just pay attention to what it says here. It says health care means care, services, supplies, or plans related to the health of an individual. And it goes on. And then if you go over to page 2, there's another definition of health care in the healthcare section and definition, and it says an individual or group plan that provides or pays the cost of care, services, or supplies related to the health of an individual, except any care, services, supplies, or plans provided by the U.S. Department of Defense, the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, or provided to Native Americans. So let's go back. This is the definition of health care. An individual or group plan that provides or pays the cost of care, services, or supplies related to the health of an individual. So that's the second definition. And then if you go to Article 4, it says what the states can do. It says each member state within its state may suspend by legislation the operation of all federal laws, rules, regulations, and orders regarding health care. And that means you got to go back to the definitions, and health care in the definitions part of this bill says health care plans. The only health care plans excluded by the language of this bill are Department of Defense, Departments of Veterans Affairs, and the Indian Health Program. Everything else, according to what the language of this bill says, I don't know what Representative Gottwalt's intention was, but the language in his bill says that the states, if they go and get this great award from Washington, that we can control every health plan in the state. Now there's a funding section that does relate to government plans. And by the way, Representative Gottwalt, Medicare is a government plan, and there are federal dollars spent here. And if you look at all the federal employees in this state that aren't in the Department of Defense or the VA, those are government employees paid with government money. And so what your bill says is you're asking the federal government to let us control all of health care outside of the Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration. And that's what your bill says. I don't know what you intended, but that's what your bill says. And so, members, if you vote for this bill, you're voting for the state of Minnesota to take over Medicare for the people of Minnesota. And that's what the bill says. I don't think that's what Representative Gottwalt intended, but that's what his bill and Alex's bill says.
Members, it's getting kind of noisy in here. If you could please take your conversations to the retiring room or to the alcoves, that would be greatly appreciated. The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, it's interesting, Representative Atkins. It's nice that you put this out on the floor. What's interesting is that the truth is a little different than what you've characterized, and I wanted to double check on it to be sure, but I have. The coalition of states that decided to do the health care compact legislation adopted this legislation, and ALEC adopted their language. So just because ALEC puts the language on their website, and because we've used some talking points that they put together, does not mean that they're the source of the legislation. ALEC adopted legislation that was drafted by the states in association who want to do this. So, members, I just want to make sure that that's being accurately represented here, since Representative Atkins has put this piece of literature out on the House floor. Then Representative Huntley, you know how to read a bill too. And you're not entitled to interpret it your own way and mislead people. I'll direct you to Article 4, State Control. Line 3.8, Representative Huntley, read it carefully. Federal and state laws, rules, regulations, and orders regarding health care will remain in effect. I think that includes Medicare, Representative Huntley. Will remain in effect unless a member state expressly suspends them pursuant to its authority under this compact. So, members, if you vote for this bill, you're not voting to do away with federal control of Medicare. Now, you might have the opportunity as a legislature to make a decision about that, but you're not voting to do that at all. Because any federal rules and regulations pertaining to health care remain in effect unless we take proactive action to suspend them. So don't fall for this, members. This is just misdirection and it's disappointing because it mischaracterizes what we're talking about here. Now again, what this bill does is simply allow us to ask Congress for permission to form the compact and have control over those dollars and over these decisions. It does not mean that we are suspending, by acting on this bill today, anything having to do with federal health care programs unless the state legislature and the governor decide that that's what we want to do.
Any further discussion? The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Gottwalt yield to a question? Representative Gottwalt, I am not an expert on health care, but I do know that from years past there was something in Congress called the Hyde Amendment. And as far as I'm aware, the Hyde Amendment was a provision that said federal health care dollars shouldn't be spent to terminate pregnancies. And I know in Minnesota we have the Gomez case, which says that the ability of poor women to have access to health care includes the right to have a pregnancy terminated. So the question I have is, if we enact this compact and we substitute Minnesota law for federal law, wouldn't we be saying that all federal dollars have to be used to, or can be used to terminate pregnancies as well?
The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thanks for the question, Representative Winkler. As I read it, that's up to us. That's going to give us the authority to do that. Now, somebody who's has better knowledge of the federal government in this regard could tell me, but what I see here in the law again, under state control, federal and state laws, rules, regulations, orders regarding health care remain in effect unless we move to change that. That would be my reading of it.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Madam Speaker, Representative Gottwalt, actually I think that wouldn't be correct because the state law is very clear. The state constitution requires it, that coverage of pregnancy termination or abortion procedures has to be covered under state health care laws. So I think if we were changing changing federal law, we'd be getting rid of the so-called Hyde Amendment, or the version of the Hyde Amendment that was adopted as part of the Affordable Care Act, and instead we'd be moving to a Gomez world in Minnesota where abortions would have to be covered by all those federal funds. So I would view this potentially as kind of a pro-choice kind of federal compact because it does replace that, what I would consider fairly unfair federal requirement, and replace it with a far more fair and equal Minnesota requirement that these kind of services are covered. And I'm sorry that Representative Atkins kind of stole my thunder. I was going to talk a little bit about ALEC, but it is interesting to know that your bill is the exact carbon copy. It's a copy-paste version of the federal or model legislation that ALEC is supporting. And the question is, this goes back a little bit to what we talked about last week, which is, if members of this body are getting scholarships to go attend conferences where model legislation like this are discussed and come back and introduce it, I think they've been lobbied to do it, and I think we should disclose that. And I'm still thinking that if any members here have gone to an ALEC conference to learn about this health compact bill and you came back and introduced the legislation, or you worked on the legislation, I think you were lobbied, and I think it'd be only fair to your constituents that you would stand up and acknowledge whether you went to such a conference or not and who paid. But Mr. Speaker, second time I've done that, Madam Speaker, and Representative Gottwalt, I think that one problem with your compact idea is that there might be some things in federal law that you like that are explicitly prohibited in Minnesota already that you would fall prey to your compact idea. But in the end, it doesn't really matter, of course, because the likelihood of Congress ever approving this compact is pretty close to zero. And the fact is we've got, I don't know how many days left of session, and we're debating the Tea Party agenda again. I mean, I thought that was kind of over in 2011, but apparently it's still alive in 2012. And this idea of states going off and forming their own compact and kind of creating their own little mini constitutional worlds outside of the federal government's control, that's, I understand that's what Tea Party members go home and fantasize about, but it's not really what the people of Minnesota sent us here to do. We are actually supposed to be here to create jobs, to perhaps put our budget back in balance, do things like that, and not pass compacts that aren't going to become law, that have no force or effect, they're just kind of silly, but from my point of view, at least have the added benefit of making health care in Minnesota more pro-choice than it is right now.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to get up because I have a slightly different response to the questions of Representative Mahoney. When we heard this bill in committee, I asked the author questions about what the state's responsibility would be regarding our programs, with the freedom that would come from no longer being shackled by the federal government and its regulations would come then the responsibility. And the people in charge right now, you have quite a track record of liking to make cuts to health and human services. And of course there's a corresponding impact in the private sector. So Representative Mahoney, for you and for your members in that Taft-Hartley plan, or for people in commercial products that get their coverage through work, for people that are covered by union contracts, your costs will go up if, as a result of a compact being enacted like this, legislatures ahead of us that come after us decide to, say, change the eligibility in Medicaid or change the benefit set in Medicaid or Minnesota Care and limit who is actually covered by the public programs, thereby making more people uninsured, using the health care system without a mechanism of payment, and costing or shifting those costs then to the private sector. We know that interrelationship between the public and the private sector. We don't always like to talk about it, but it's real. So, if this compact goes forward, and if we look at the track record of the GOP majority and their desire to cut health care, I can see that middle-class families are going to pay more for their health care. People like Representative Mahoney, who gets his coverage through his Taft-Hartley plan, will pay more in premiums and out-of-pocket costs. So, I have not had a lot of people coming to me saying get rid of Medicare as we know it. In fact, it's a pretty popular program, so is Medicaid. People rely on it. And I'm not sure, really, that the people of Minnesota think this body is going to be all that much better than the Congress in trying to redesign Medicare or Medicaid if we get rid of that. For a lot of reasons, I think this is a fool's errand, this piece of legislation, though I respect Representative Gottwalt. But I would vote no. I think that it creates a lot of uncertainty for people who are counting on us.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, members, this is a very interesting bill. And as I was looking at this, I was thinking, well, Minnesota already belongs to a compact. We have belonged to a compact since about 1849, I think it is. And, we've belonged to a compact for a long time, and it's called the United States of America, members. It's pretty interesting what this bill tries to do. And Representative Gottwalt, I guess a couple hours back when we started discussing this, and you were talking about getting together with other states to go and petition Congress. And I thought, well, that's kind of like you can't go and talk to the boss unless you've got another worker with you, Representative Gottwalt, we can do this now. We don't need a compact to petition Congress. We have congressional representatives, 8 congressmen, 2 senators, that are elected by the people of Minnesota. And that gives us a way that we can change the law if we don't like the law. So we don't need this bill. We don't need to band together with other states in order to go ask Congress to do anything. They work for us. And if they're not doing what we think that they should do, then we should petition them, or the people, I can do this as an individual. You can do it as an individual. Any of our constituents can do it as an individual. Contact your congressman. Contact your senator. Vote them out. That's our privilege as American citizens. That's our process that we have. So we don't need this bill. And the other interesting thing about this bill that really strikes me is, Congress really doesn't just impose stuff on us. And I think you've referenced this, Representative Gottwalt. This is about whether we're going to ask Congress to just give us the money and don't put any strings on it. They don't tell us what to do. As long as we use our money, our state money that we raise ourselves, that we ask the taxpayers to give us, we can do with it what we want. It's only when we get money from Congress, we get federal money, and then they say if you're going to get the money, you're going to use it in certain ways so that Congress can have something relatively uniform across the country. That's what Congress does. So, Representative Gottwalt, I don't think we need to ask Congress for permission to get out of the rules. If we don't want the rules, just don't take the money. Well, you might say, well, we can't do that. Well, that is your choice. If you take the money, the rules come with it. And members, we sure do this to other bodies. We give a lot of money. We block grant our Health and Human Services money to our counties. And do we give it to them without strings? No. We have rules that they follow because what they're doing is carrying out our policies with money that we give them to do that. And that's all Congress is doing. And again, if you don't like it, there are ways to change it. We are not servants of master here. We are actually running the show, believe it or not. Even though we don't sometimes feel like it, we may not like it. So, I think this bill is, nice discussion here. Good opportunity for members to get up and talk about the tyranny of Congress and all that. But, I think freedom and rights are really important. Representative Wardlow talked about this. People really do have a lot of concern about freedom, and I think there's some freedoms that we really are going to be really, I think, enabled in the Affordable Care Act. And one is the freedom to be free from bankruptcy because of your health care costs. To be free from having your insurance company drop you because you got sick. Freedom from being unable to buy insurance because you have a pre-existing condition. These are all freedoms that people are going to get or that they already have under the Affordable Care Act. And, those freedoms and rights, I think, are pretty important to Minnesotans. And, we don't know exactly what the Supreme Court is going to do, but I certainly think that the freedom to not have your health care jerked around by insurance companies and taken away when you need it the most, I think that's a pretty important freedom that Minnesotans are appreciating now and will come to appreciate more and more as it affects them more and more. So, Representative Gottwalt, nice try. I think it's, a bill that I would say that it creates more jobs for lawyers, except I don't know why. I seriously doubt this would ever become law. It's certainly one that's created a lot of good, fun talking for lawyers here on the House floor. I'm glad we got a bunch of lawyers here, Representative Rukavina. So the lawyers, we appreciate the Constitution, and we know what it means to have a union and belong to that union.
Any further discussion? The member from Dakota, Representative Wardlow.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Very quickly to address the point raised earlier with regard to Doe versus Gomez. Members, Doe versus Gomez would not automatically become effective and override the Hyde Amendment if this compact were to be adopted and become law in Minnesota. Because if you look at Article 4 of the compact at line 3.8 through 310, it states that federal laws, rules and regulations and orders regarding health care remain in effect unless a member state expressly suspends them pursuant to its authority under the compact. That means that a member state must expressly pass legislation, if you look up at line 3.5, to suspend the operation of any federal law. So a Supreme Court case in effect in Minnesota does not automatically become effective upon adoption of the compact here to override anything. The same goes for Medicare, Medicaid. None of that would be affected. All those programs would remain in effect unless Minnesota were under this compact to adopt specific legislation pursuant to the authority of Minnesota under this compact.
Any further discussion? The member from Swift, Representative Falk.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I guess if Representative Gottwalt would yield to a question.
He yields. Representative Falk.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Gottwalt, I was just trying to read through the bill here, and I didn't catch earlier, but where did this bill come from, if you could help me out?
The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Falk, this bill originally came from a group of states that wanted to put this together, and I'm glad you gave me the opportunity to address the constant misdirection about ALEC. ALEC adopted the language that was put together by these states, the 4 states that have already adopted this. It wasn't the other way around. Somebody's alluded to the fact that this is a Tea Party idea or this came from an ALEC conference or whatnot. First of all, I adopted this bill and brought it forward because I think it's a good idea. I think I'd rather see Minnesota in charge of these dollars, frankly, than the federal government. I think we would do a much better, more efficient and effective job spending those dollars on behalf of our residents than the federal government. I'll admit that. I think Minnesota stands head and shoulders above the rest of the nation in health care and can do the best job of it. So that's where this bill came from. A group of states got together, put together the language. ALEC adopted their language. Representative Winkler, that's why their language looks exactly like this bill. They adopted the language put together by the states that are bringing this forward. It's not it's a free country yet. I think they're inclined to adopt whatever they darn well please. But that's the source of this legislation. That's the reason that I've brought it forward, and I hope that answers the question.
The member from Swift, Representative Falk.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Representative Gottwalt, I guess he gives a perspective. I was trying to read through this as quickly as possible. If he would yield to one more question.
He yields. Representative Falk.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Gottwalt, how many times is the word Minnesota in this bill? I'm trying to find an instance of Minnesota in this bill.
Member from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Falk, if you've read the bill carefully, you notice at least one reference on line 2.15. In fact, it's a very important reference because it mentions the estimate of member state base funding level for the state of Minnesota is $13.348 billion. Okay, so this legislation is specific to Minnesota in at least that regard, and I'm not sure if it's mentioned elsewhere, but there is a specific reference to the state. Thank you.
The member from Swift, Representative Falk.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Representative Gottwalt, thank you for pointing that out to me. I guess it looks like that's the only instance where I can see Minnesota in here. And I guess I would just say that there may have been a slight drafting error because under talking about member states, if we're dealing with Minnesota, they should have been drafted to the laws of the state of Minnesota. But it's just, once again, I think that this is kind of that template that you can put any place and insert the state because it's not drafted in a way that would make it signatory to Minnesota. And save for that $1 appropriation for Minnesota, that's the only reference to the state. And so if this were truly drafted for Minnesota, there would be some more applicability to Minnesota laws. If the comment and the claim is going to be made that we do health care better than anybody else, and I was trying to figure that out too, I think we do health care quite well in this state, but I was looking to try to find some reference to how we rank vis-a-vis other states or other countries in the world, and I have not found one. So I don't know if we should be adopting model legislation that other states that are not near the top of how health care is ranked. This was a Forbes study I looked at that had Hawaii and Iowa near the top, but I don't think that we should be adopting model legislation that other states that rank consistently poorer on health care than we do, because we may be good, but I still think that we can strive to be better.
The member from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members.
I just wanted to make a couple of comments about the compact. I strongly support this legislation. I want to thank Representative Gottwalt for bringing it forward. You know, last year I had a medical doctor from my district stop up here at the outside the House of Representatives, and he called me out there and he gave me a sheet, and he showed me his reimbursement rate from government programs and also private insurance. And what he showed me was, and this was an older doctor who was still independent. He hadn't become an employee of a hospital. And he was getting about $17 per office visit reimbursement under Medicaid. He is getting about $34 from Medicare, and he was getting about $54 from private insurance. And what he told me is he loses money on Medicaid, he loses money on Medicare reimbursement, and he actually makes some money on private insurance. His problem was he's seeing more and more people on Medicaid and Medicare and less on private insurance. So the fact is the private insurance sector for years has bailed out the government under reimbursement programs. All those government programs are projected to go bankrupt in the future. We need this compact to do pilot programs and experimentation on how to deliver health care more efficiently, effectively, and get higher reimbursement rates to our doctors and hospitals. We can't keep doing things like we've done in the past. We need to look at making changes and run things in a more innovative and dynamic way. The problem with the government, they're a dinosaur. They're fossilized, and they get locked into doing things the same old way, regardless of the changing demographics, regardless of medical innovation, and they're an impediment to delivering good health care. They're not helping the situation. And Obamacare will actually make things worse. Thank you, and thank you, Representative Gottwalt, for bringing this bill forward.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Okay. The clerk will close the roll. I recognize the member from Rosemont, Dakota. Representative Bills votes aye. There being 70 ayes and 58 nays, the bill passes, and it is and its title is agreed to. Next bill on the calendar is Senate File 2137. I recognize the member from Carver, Representative Hoppe. Oh, please report the bill first. The clerk will report the bill first.
Senate File 2137, number 14 on the calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to insurance.
The member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Madam Speaker and members, this is a bill that when it left the Commerce Committee had a lot of controversy attached to it, and we made a commitment that we were not going to do anything further to it until all the parties involved, the insurance industry and residential contractors, got together and reached an agreement that everybody could live with. They did reach that agreement recently, and I'm not aware at this time of any more opposition to this bill. The part that's left fits almost entirely on one page. It's fairly simple and straightforward. In statute, we changed the language from repair or replacement of residential roofing or siding to home repair or improvement services, so we're expanding what that will cover. We're also giving the Commissioner of the Department of Labor and Industry the authority and the ability to regulate and enforce people that are now licensed, the licensees, and will be under his purview. With that, members, I would appreciate your support, and I would stand for questions.
There being no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 2137.
Third reading. Discussion. Any discussion? The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I've used up my allotment of time for the day, so I'll be very brief. Just wanted to thank Chairman Hoppe for his work on this bill. It kind of snuck up, the insurance industry made a proposal, it snuck up on a bunch of contractors in Minnesota. They had very little notice. They came into the hearing, they were very upset, and rightly so. They retained, I believe, Lisa Fournette to represent them. She did a really nice job in working out an arrangement. We support the bill, and I appreciate the work that's gone into it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chairman Hoppe.
Any additional discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 yeas and 0 nays, the motion prevails, and Senate File 2137 is adopted. The member from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Pursuant to Rule 1.22, it's my intention to place House File 1284 Beard, Senate File 230 Norton, Senate File 1808 Lanning, House File 2685 Beard, and House File 1752 House on the fiscal calendar for Thursday, April 26, 2012. And if I might, members, the Ways and Means Committee will not reconvene this evening.
The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 2535. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 2535, number 31 on the calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to education.
I call upon the author of the bill from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This provision, Senate File 2535, makes two important changes to the statute for the Board of School Administrators. One is that allows this board now to also disapprove of a preparation program for our school administrators. And secondly, it makes the licensure fee due according to the fiscal calendar rather than annually. Those are the two important changes. Members, I ask for a green vote.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Biskins moving to amend Senate File 2535, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A2.
Call upon the member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I encourage support of the amendment.
The member from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. While Representative Biskins is the original author of the Board of School Administrators, I know he has spoken with the Executive Director, Stan Mack, and so I think we should all vote for his amendment.
Any discussion on the amendment? The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Basically what this amendment does is the Board of Administrators, school administrators, charges a fee. It's an entirely fee-based board, so there is no general fund appropriation to this board. Administrators have to pay their annual dues to this board for their license and for representation from this board. School administrators wanted this board to be created, and so we created it in law with the understanding there'd be no general fund appropriation. Well, the board right now is having a difficult time with some administrators who are not paying their fee. And so what they would like to do is have the opportunity to basically withhold their license if they don't pay the fee. And, you know, I guess if they're the licensing group, all right, and they wanted this board, then they should have that right. What this amendment basically does, though, is says, you know, the Board of Administrators can't, you know, send out a notice, you owe your fee, and then 2 months later say, we're taking away your license. You know, we know how mail goes, and sometimes you put something in a drawer, you forget about it or whatnot. All right. This amendment basically says, you know, you've got to give them some notice about how long they have to pay their fee. All right. Not just a reminder, pay your fee, but pay your fee within this amount of time. And so that's what this amendment does.
Any additional discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the A2 amendment, please signify by saying aye. Opposed say nay. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There being no additional amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 2535 as amended.
Third reading. Any discussion? Any additional discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 0 nays, Senate File 2535 is passed as amended. Next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 2342. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 2342, number 12 on the calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to commerce.
Call upon the member from Anoka, Representative Abeler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It's actually a great pleasure to be here describing this bill today. When I was in Commerce, I don't know, 6 weeks ago or whenever it was, a month ago, this bill was in no shape at all to become law, and I pledged to work with the insurance carriers, the chiropractors, therapists, MDs, hospitals, lawyers, and whoever else want to talk about this topic about no fault, try to find something we agreed on. Historically, there's been no-fault bills brought to the floor by some group or other from one point of view or other, upon which there was no agreement, and they attempted to get votes to simply pass it over the objections of the others. And so when you get these people in a room, oh yeah, thank you. When you get people in a room of this topic, they are the most comfortable sitting on the perimeter of the room looking in because they're so afraid of what might happen to them at the hands of their fellow, even insurance carrier. And so what this is a product of consensus in that group, which I want to tell you was very narrow. And so, Mr. Speaker, if there's a delete all, maybe we'll take that amendment. Mr. Speaker, we can take the amendment now, and that's a delete all which describes the agreement.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Abeler and others moving to amend Senate File 2342, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded DE8.
Call upon the author of the amendment, Representative Abeler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. We tried a lot of ideas about what might have consensus. The problems that exist in this arena include fee schedules, treatment guidelines, independent medical exams, length of care, how bad the treatments, how bad the injuries are, and who agrees, and who's going to get sued about what. We didn't get to any of that sort of thing, but we did agree on some advertising. In particular, there's one group, you might have heard the jingle, 411 Pain, that promises you $40,000. Pretty good deal. Not exactly the purpose of auto insurance is to give people $40,000. And so that's an example of an abuse. Some clinicians abuse the system and treat too long. We didn't get to that agreement on that part. There are some people who will run interference and go attract patients and give them rides and pay them money to go become patients when they're not injured very bad. They're called runners, cappers, and steers. That's a problem. The amendment that's before you is agreed on by all parties, and it involves advertising and adds some teeth to the runners, cappers, and steers piece. In short, it says advertising must be undertaken by a healthcare provider. They must display the legal name of the healthcare provider or their clinic name. They must tell what kind of health provider they are. It must not be false, deceptive, or misleading. It must not give reference to dollar amounts like the $40,000. And it must not imply endorsement by law enforcement or personnel. The second part has to do with giving teeth to the runners and cappers thing. I believe a letter by Ramsey County Attorney Choi brought forward the second part in particular, and he endorses the bill as well. And it allows them to actually prosecute people for fraudulently procuring and soliciting prospective patients. Members, that's the bill. I'll stand for questions.
Any discussion to the A8 amendment, the DE8 amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, say nay. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There being no additional amendments at the desk, the clerk will give a bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 2342, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. Call upon the author of the bill from Anoka, Representative Abeler.
Mr. Speaker, I'll offer some closing remarks. I hope this is the beginning of some working together in this area. It has been hard fought to get this simple language done, but I'm pleased to bring a product forward. Maybe next year we'll have something about treatment guidelines, fee schedules, independent medical exams, and the rights of patients and the duties of insurance companies. But at this point, it's a good start, members. I urge your support. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Call upon the member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker and members, I just want to thank Representative Abeler for the work on this bill. A lot of the bills that we do are somewhat controversial and seem to never find consensus with different factions. This is one that is very, very, very difficult to get the folks on either side of this to agree, and I really appreciate Representative Abeler's work and Senator Gazelka and all the folks who work very, very hard on this very difficult and contentious issue to find a peace in the valley. So way to go, Representative Abeler. Appreciate a green vote.
Seeing the call upon the member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Again, Mr. Speaker, I'll be very brief. I wanted to indicate the same sentiments for Representative Abeler's work. I think he's up to his 8th version on the effort. He has designated a certain area of advertising that he's targeting here, and it does not affect other areas of advertising for legitimate, appropriate chiropractors, healthcare providers, lawyers. It raises some questions. I know I asked in committee, Representative Abeler, if it puts out of business the 1-800-ASK Gary's, the 1-800-411-PAINS. I actually tried to call them, or my assistant tried to call them on Monday, the Gary folks, and he was told that they'd get back to him in a few days. We represented that this could have a major impact on their business, and so we haven't heard anything back from them. But I appreciate the efforts, and we'll see where it all goes.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 yeas and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. The Majority Leader from Washington, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I move the calendar of the day be continued.
Representative Dean moves the calendar for the day be continued. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. The motion prevails. Motions and resolutions. There's a copy of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there's no objection, we'll take action on these motions first. Hearing no objections, the motions prevail. Announcements. The Majority Leader from Washington, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, announcement, GOP caucus will meet immediately after session in the Capitol Caucus Room here. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. Thursday, April 26, 2012.
Representative Dean moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. Thursday, April 26, 2012. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. The motion prevails. The member from Hennepin, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Dean yield for a question?
He will. Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Dean, if you could just give us a map for tomorrow. We'll be coming in at 10, and then will we be breaking immediately for caucuses?
Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hillstrom, tomorrow will be much like most of the days this week. We'll be coming in right at 10, and then breaking for caucus again. And tomorrow, I don't know how long that might be. The situation will probably depend on negotiations that are continuing right now. We'll try to keep the DFL staff and minority leader and yourself apprised of the situation and communicate this evening and into tomorrow morning.
Representative Dean.
I move the House do now adjourn.
Representative Dean moves the House to now adjourn. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. The motion prevails. The House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Thursday, April 26, 2012.